W's up. Western, Western, Western U, college fair and square. Arts and meds are strong for you, deny it if you dare. Here we go now. And purple colors are one by all who know. Just which color is the best, come and let us show. Cause this U is our U, move forward, we'll strive to do our best to fight with might and main. What's made, we will always adore her. Alma Mater, Western School of Fame. When the team goes marching down the field, we know a team will never ever yield. We know the other team has lots of pep, lots of pep. We'll see our team will know they're out of step. And when the game goes down in history, history, it's another Western victory, victory. Cheers go out for Western U, Western U. Rah, rah, rah. To the right. Rickety, Eye of sky of Western U. W-E-S-T-E-R-N. Western, Western, Western. Woo! Now I'd like to invite Councillor Tasia up to give us the land recognition.
My name is Inam Teja, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to you today. An important part of a land acknowledgement is situating and articulating one's position on the land. I am here as a non-Indigenous settler. My mother moved to Turtle Island from Tanzania in the 70s, and my dad was a refugee from Uganda during the Idi Amin crisis. I grew up in Calgary on Treaty 7 land, which is the traditional territory of the Blackfoot, Stoney Nakoda, and Tsuut'ina people. I'm also here as a representative of Huron College, and I want to acknowledge the complex colonial history of Huron. For starters, there's the name Huron, which is named after the Anglican Diocese of Huron, which is an appropriation for the name of the Wendat people. As an Anglican college, it is clear that Huron played a part in Christian evangelism and colonization. Unfortunately, the history of Huron College's colonial role is murky and unclear, but it is not something we should avoid researching because it is uncomfortable. We do know that Huron alumni played a significant role in the residential school system, as E.F. Wilson, a Huron alum and the first librarian of Huron College, founded the Shingwauk Residential School. Huron College also had direct ties to the running of the Mohawk Institute. There's likely far more information on our institution's colonial history that needs to be investigated and understood, but it is very clear that the land that Huron and Western is located on does not belong to us. We are on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Andijanwara peoples. The legacies of colonialism are not in the past, and neither are the original people of this land. The Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, and Munsee Delaware Nation are all contemporary communities, along with the growing Indigenous urban population here. So as we continue our studies in this place, let us not shy away from confronting the uncomfortable parts of our past and our present.
Thank you. You may now be seated. Okay, we will now perform roll call, and polls are now open. All right, let's go, ladies. Okay, 3, 2, 1, polls are closed. Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. I have no comments really, other than reminder that we have our AGM next Sunday at 11 a.m. in the Wave, and the agenda will be coming out at the end of this week after it's been approved by the Agenda and Council Operations Standing Committee. Okay, we will now approve the agenda for this evening. I will look for any amendments to the agenda. Okay, I myself have an amendment. We are doing a test election just to make sure that the online voting works for our SPO election next week. So I would like to add that after our for action section. If I could get a mover and a seconder for that. Okay, Councillor Rocchese, Councillor Anthony, thank you. Anyone opposed to adding that test election? Okay, I'll take it as approved. And any other amendments to the agenda at this time? Okay, I'll need a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as amended. Councillor Dinesi, Councillor Stebbing. And any objections to approving the agenda as amended? No? Okay, great. I'll take that as approved as well. We will move on to the approval of our minutes. We have 2 minutes to approve this evening, which I sent out earlier today. Hopefully you had a chance to look them over. You will have noticed that the November minutes were a mix of an old format and a new format, and the January minutes were only the new format, which has been condensed from the old format, which used to be a word for word, and now we're just looking to have the important motions, amendments, and whether it carried or failed. So I'll look for any amendments to the minutes. Okay, I'll look for a mover and a seconder for the November minutes. Councillor Tino and Councillor Baldwin. Any objections to the approval of the November minutes? Okay, seeing none, I will take those as approved. And the January minutes, I did send out an updated copy with the amendment that Councillor Barroso had brought up. So hopefully you all saw both of those emails. I will look for a mover and a seconder. Councillor Stebbing, Councillor Tino. Any other amendments to those minutes? And any objections to approving them? Okay, I'll take them as approved. Thank you very much. Okay, we will now move on to the presentation section of our council meeting, starting with the Allyship Network. We have a 30-minute presentation with a 5-minute Q&A, and we have Lane, the Allyship Coordinator, here to present. Sorry, technical difficulties. Okay, thanks for your patience. All right, whenever you're ready.
Hello, everybody. So, do we have a clicker? Oh, okay. So my name is Elaine. You can go to me. So my name's Lane. I'm the Allyship Network Coordinator, the entity formerly known as Ally Western, as I tell everyone. I use they, them pronouns, and this is my co-presenter for today.
Hello, my name is Callie Chang Paulus. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a training facilitator with Allyship Network.
Cool. So we're really thankful here to give the presentation. This is actually my first time doing the presentation. I wrote it, authored it, everything, and yet Callie and Alec are the only ones who have done it. So this is a test for me as well. So yeah, even though you already have done land acknowledgements, we also have our own land acknowledgements we like to do. So take it away.
So, Western University is located in close proximity to 3 vibrant local First Nations. We have the Chippewa of the Thames First Nations, part of the Anishinaabe Nation, the Oneida Nation of the Thames, part of the Haudenosaunee Six Nations, and the Munsee Delaware Nation, which is part of the Lenni Lenape Nation. Historically, the Attawandaron, which are neutral peoples, also settled this region, along with the Algonquin and Haudenosaunee peoples. So today, there is a diverse and growing Aboriginal population that lives in and around London. So the reason we do land acknowledgements is to recognize that land in an expression of gratitude and appreciation towards Indigenous peoples. It's also to recognize that the land that we're on and colonialism is an ongoing experience. It's not something that exists only in the past, and it's not something that we indicate is only historically true, but also currently true. So, for example, here I have Karina's name tag. I'm just gonna take this. It's not particularly useful to me, but I'm gonna take it. And isn't it great for Karina, who is not here, to just let me take it? Let's all acknowledge that Karina has not stopped me from taking this. Isn't that great? Now, although Karina is not here, I'm sure she doesn't particularly appreciate me stealing this name tag, pretending my name is Karina. And while it's nice that I acknowledge that it did not belong to me, that does not make the fact that I took it and am currently using it any different. So that's another thing to consider when you're doing land acknowledgements particularly. So in terms of Western, the Indigenous Services Center is located on the 2nd floor of Western Student Services building, and the building adjacent to this one. And it's a vital space that acts as a central focus for Indigenous students and communities to gather and find a sense of belonging at Western.
Cool. So if we want to go to the next slide. So we have a table of contents. It's really small. The screen is not the best for us. So we talk about a lot of things, safe spaces, allyship. Usually we talk about free speech, but I'm sure you're all very experienced on that issue. Oppression, intersectionality, privilege, calling in and calling out, and we also talk about more tips for allyship. It's pretty much dependent on the situation we're in. So yeah, next slide. Yeah, so Allyship Network is a USC service that is focused on the promotion of equity and justice for marginalized communities on Western's campus. So we're looking to uplift the voices of marginalized communities and promote better ways to practice allyship and learn how to become accomplices in the persistent fights against institutional and structural oppression. So Ally Western takes an anti-oppressive approach to our new training program, which is not new anymore, and our workshops, and we focus on ways individuals can constantly work towards practicing allyship.
Now, before we get into it, I would like to clarify that this presentation is a safe space, and in saying such, we should discuss what a safe space means because it is a very often misunderstood term. So safe spaces are spaces and events where individuals attending should feel confident that they will not feel discriminated or harassed based on their gender identity, sexuality, race, disability, and other aspects of their identity. Simply put, safe spaces are places where marginalized people can exist without challenge to their identity. So for me, as a trans woman, I experience a safe space where you are not questioning my womanhood. So we have a quote here from Roxane Gay. It's quite long, so I'm not going to read I'm not going to read all of it, but it's mostly those who take safety for granted disparage safety because it is, like so many other rights, one that has always been inalienable to them. So this is really saying that people who ignore safe spaces are the people that typically don't need them. So it's important to consider that safe spaces do not mean that all discussion and ideas stop, and you can have many complex discussions within a safe space. But these discussions start on the assumption that everyone in the room acknowledges other diverse identities and experiences and respects them. It is assumed that you will not harass each other about whether their experiences or identity are real. Often safe places are places for shelter or learning, or sometimes both. And given that this is a presentation, this training does take a different form than other safe spaces. So while I consider this a place where people from marginalized identities should feel safe, it is also a place for you as new people learning new concepts, for you to learn these new concepts and ask questions about them that you don't understand or are new to you. So ultimately, my job isn't to make you feel as if I'm throwing concepts at you. So education and allyship is important, and I'll explain understanding concepts such as these in more detail.
So I took our definition of allyship from an organization called PeerNet BC. It's my favorite definition of allyship, and the reason why we use allyship as opposed to ally, and thus the reason we changed our name, will become clearer throughout this presentation. So our definition of allyship is an active, consistent, and challenging practice of unlearning and reevaluating. It's when a person of privilege seeks to work in solidarity. So it's not an identity, it's a lifelong process of building relationships based on trust, consistency, accountability, and it is not self-defined. You cannot call yourself an ally without putting in the work. In fact, you can't really call yourself an ally. You can practice allyship, but ally is a label that is loaned to you when you build meaningful relationships with marginalized individuals and groups, and ultimately, it's something that can be taken away if you violate the terms and conditions of that contract. So in this presentation, I would define true practices of allyship as dedicating yourself to engaging in anti-oppressive practices and working to disrupt the ways in which marginalized people face oppression, which is very jargony. So anti-oppressive practices basically provide a framework for constructively addressing and challenging oppressive dynamics as they play out in our organizing. So that doesn't simply mean that you can acknowledge that racism exists or homophobia exists and that's where your job stops. No, you need to challenge it in your everyday life. And that's what I mean by disruption, is that everyday challenge. So we're not just focusing on individual allyship and action, but we're focusing on questioning the very reasons behind oppression and working to deconstruct oppressive systems that cause harm to marginalized communities. So why does allyship matter? It matters because it lets people around you know that you are a person that is accepting, that you'll stand up for them, that you're a person that will not ignore a slur, that you will fight for their rights, and you will not stop just because you have yours. So you can practice allyship in so many different ways, including the acknowledgement of bigotry, but also taking action and elevating the voices of marginalized groups. So why does this matter to you? If you're not affected, why should you go out of your way to combat oppression?
Because it's free. And now, this does sound glib, but it's true. It doesn't cost you anything. So, in fact, practicing allyship is actually a rewarding experience. It's rewarding because it makes the people around you feel good and safe. It's a practice in compassion. The abject refusal to practice allyship in everyday life is an abject refusal to make yourself and the space you inhabit welcoming to other people. It's nothing but a beacon that tells you that you are not a good person to be around. So, practicing allyship isn't political correctness unless you believe that political correctness is synonymous with compassion. Because at its core, allyship is about exercising compassion and understanding with the people that you interact with. And while concepts of allyship may be new to you and come with a steep learning curve, it goes a long way to make the people around you comfortable. So small acts of compassion and acknowledgement can mean a lot to people who face an uphill battle due to discrimination, as well as individual and systemic oppression every single day. Any inconvenience that you face in being called out, being wrong, or changing your language does not cost you anything, while for marginalized people, lack of allyship can come at great cost to personal health, well-being, and their sense of place in the world. So, while these small acts may seem small to you, to marginalized people, it can have the effect of a death of 1,000 cuts. Yep. So, here we come to the main topic of our presentation, oppression. So, because we are approaching this from an anti-oppressive framework, it's important to explore what oppression is. So, oppression, explained simply, is influence or power and prejudice, and that is oppression. Prejudice is an attitude, perspectives, and assumptions based on limited information, often stereotypes. Prejudice beliefs, language, and practices are damaging on a personal and social level because they deny the individuality and complexity of a person, and it forces people into basic or often derogatory caricatures, one-dimensional identities, and hurtful labels. No one is free of prejudice because we have unfortunately all been raised with prejudiced ideologies all around us. Even if our families taught us about equity, many dominant narratives in society teach us prejudice in various ways. And now, prejudice itself is often negative and is wrong in of itself. It does not automatically lead to oppression. The and power part of oppression means that oppression functions through power being exercised against a group that there is an unjust prejudice formed around. The fact that some people have more social power and access to privilege than others leads to oppression of less powerful groups. In Canadian society, less powerful people include those who fall outside of the norms of white, heterosexual, middle to upper class, able-bodied people. Oppression happens when less powerful people are silenced, ignored, shut out, and seen as abnormal and looked down upon. Oppression comes in many different forms like sexism, racism, homophobia, and transphobia. And people can experience different kinds of oppression at the same time or be privileged in one way and oppressed in another. Because of this is why reverse racism as a concept does not make sense. Same with reverse sexism. It's because there's no power behind what may be a particular prejudice.
Cool. So, like we said, oppression can manifest itself in many ways. So it can be expressed on an interpersonal level through discriminatory speech, but it can also be on a systemic level based on the ways that society and the world have been maintained and organized to suit the needs, desires, and wants of powerful groups. So oppression is a form of economic, social, political exploitation that affirms a system that is arranged on the basis of superiority and inferiority. So at Ally Western, I found this amazing framework online that looks at oppression, and basically it confronts it using the 4 I's. So the first I is ideological. So ideological forms of oppression take place in dominant narratives and develop the isms, so racism, sexism, heterosexism, that dominate everyday life. So ideological oppression has its basis in hierarchies created by dominant groups that assign positive qualities to dominant groups while others have opposing or negative qualities. So interpersonal is the next I. So interpersonal oppression is ways that ideological oppression plays out between individuals or groups. So oppression and ideology often gives an alibi for the dominant class to personally mistreat marginalized individuals. So institutional oppression is when ideologies of the dominant class are manifested in institutions and systems that characterize our world. Ultimately, institutional oppression seeks to control marginalized peoples, and this is embedded in institutions themselves and in, for example, the language they use. And internalized oppression, which is means that the oppressor doesn't have to exert any more pressure because we now do it to ourselves and each other. The fourth way oppression works is within the groups of people who suffer the most. Oppressed people internalize ideology of inferiority. They see it reflected in institutions. They experience mistreatment interpersonally from members of the dominant group. And they eventually come to internalize negative messages about themselves. So there are often only two places to dump those feelings, which is on oneself or on people in the same group, which is also known as horizontal violence. So instead of violence coming from the top down, it's between groups. So none of these aspects of oppression can exist separately. Each is completely supported by the others. So any attempt to dismantle one sort of oppression should include an element of challenge at all four levels. So another thing about oppression and the perpetuation of oppression, and I think this is really, really important, is that most people do not want to be racist or homophobic, but society is built in a way that is racist or homophobic, etc., and it can affect us and our unconscious biases and how we process the world. So we're influenced by negative stereotypes assigned to us and assigned to others from birth, and it is ingrained in our processes. So the system generates active racism, homophobia, and transphobia, and unlearning it is a constant uphill process. No one is perfect, and we can't unlearn everything at once. It's something that I've been working on for years to unlearn, and it's a process, but it's a really worthy process that in the end produces something positive. It produces allyship in some aspects. So it can manifest itself in racism, which is racial prejudice plus power, or transphobia, which is prejudice towards transgender people plus power. And often people face oppression in many ways, which is what we talk about when we talk about intersectionality.
So intersectionality has recently gained popularity in activist and social justice circles. So I want to ask of you, how many of you have actually heard the term intersectionality? And how many of you would say you have a very firm grasp on what it means? That's much less. So intersectionality, as with many terms used on the internet, is often used incorrectly. So the term was coined around 1989 when it was coined by lawyer and scholar Kimberly Crenshaw to describe the ways in which race and gender intersected in the lives of American Black women. It was meant to describe how race and class aren't just stacked on top of each other in a leaning tower of oppression, but how they intersected at a four-way with Black women standing in the middle, at the intersection of a unique form of oppression bolstered by the combined efforts of racism and sexism. Crenshaw's theory has since been adapted to describe other forms of oppression upon certain groups of people. For example, two groups, such as Black men and Indigenous women, will both face racism, but they will face different kinds of racism, and Indigenous women may face gendered racism that is unique to their experiences and intersections of oppression. You cannot separate the causes, which would be anti-Indigenous racism and sexism, because they are deeply intermingled. Many people like to think of intersectionality like it's a salad, like you have all of your ingredients, you put in your lettuce, your tomato, and let's say your cabbage. But say you don't like tomato, you can just remove the tomato. But with intersectionality, it's not easy to isolate different aspects like that. You can't just pull out that tomato. So in reality, it's much more like baking a cake, in which you put in your ingredients and then you mix them up, and it is impossible to extrude any one ingredient from that. In that way, in intersectionality, it is impossible to extrude racism from the combination of racism and sexism that one might face. So it's important to remember that working with an intersectional framework isn't a game to see who is the most oppressed. It's about acknowledging that because of the unique experiences of certain groups of people, they will experience oppression differently than others. It means keeping in mind that people are harmed on multiple axes of oppression, so those forms of oppression must go. It means keeping in mind that your experiences are not everyone else's, which leads us to our next topic. Privilege. Now, this is another term that is very widely misused. So, acknowledging your own privilege is key in anti-oppression activism and allyship. You may have to acknowledge the places in which you do not have experience and in which you may need to listen to others, and ways in which you can use your privilege for good and help your fellow humans. So, first off, what is a privilege? A privilege is a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group of people. A privileged group views that its social, cultural, and economic experiences are the norm, something that everyone else should experience. Rather than being something that is earned, privilege is something that is given to a person based on characteristics they are assigned or obtained at birth, such as cultural identity, ability, class, gender, age, sexual orientation, etc., with a few exceptions such as disability or class, as those can change over your life. Privilege can take form in many ways: white privilege, straight privilege, cisgender privilege, etc. Having privilege does not mean that you are a bad person, and it doesn't mean you should be guilty. That is an important takeaway. So you can have privilege in one aspect but be oppressed in another. For example, as a trans woman, I experience oppression, but I don't have the same experiences that a trans wheelchair user would have. So the important thing to remember about privilege is that you're not being asked to apologize for it, you're not being asked to do anything, but acknowledge it and acknowledge that other people have experiences that are fundamentally different from your own, and that it's important to listen to people when they try to explain that their differences, to explain that their experiences are different from yours. So a good way to examine your privilege is questioning whether or not you are able to opt out of a conversation. For example, if it is about your right to exist, your humanity, then you can ignore the issues at hand and they don't have any implications towards yourself. For example, as a transgender person, the recent discussions about bathroom bills would literally exclude me from public life or leaving my home for more than 2 hours at a time. So that's a conversation that I would not be able to ignore.
So we just threw a lot of information at you folks. So I hope you understand a bit. I need to stop breathing into this microphone about what privilege, discrimination, and oppression is, but why does it matter and how can you talk about it in your everyday life? So it's understanding all these things is key to practicing allyship. So you can't diagnose the problem without acknowledging the symptoms, and you can't even begin to help eliminate the issue. So one person is not going to solve racism. You aren't going to suddenly be the perfect quote-unquote ally who fixes oppression for your friends. And what may seem like a futile process is one that can make the world of difference to others. So it's an ongoing process, but as I've said, and we've said multiple times, it's worth it. So we have all this information, but how do we use it in a meaningful way? How can you practice allyship? Well, I'm pleased to inform you there are many ways. So there's a very popular one, which is calling in and calling out. So one simple way to practice allyship is to draw attention to and confront bigoted and oppressive behavior. So privileged people who have the means, and that includes mental health or wellness, stability, to call out oppressive behavior should often do so, especially considering that marginalized people often do not have the ability to do so. So this concerns, So calling out is often the public confrontation of oppressive behavior, where calling in is more of a private and one-on-one approach. So both calling in and calling out should be viewed as you challenging someone to be better. So, and they're both valid approaches. Well, we have all heard about social media and call-out culture, which has unfortunately been warped by bad faith activism, bad faith social media. Calling out is still a valid form of confronting oppressive behavior. Well, it might be more confrontational. Confrontation is often necessary depending on the situation. So like in anything, you should use your discretion to determine what the best course of action is.
So next we're going to go through a step-by-step on how to call out. So calling people out is a surprisingly difficult process that takes some practice. It's something you have to learn how to do, but once you do it, it's something that will become essential to practices of allyship. So we'll take an example. You're in a meeting and someone has said something that enforces an unfortunate racial stereotype. So you can break calling out into 4 simple steps. So the first is breathe, take a deep breath. It's actually very scary, anxiety-inducing to challenge someone on what they said, challenge their oppression, and it does make situations very uncomfortable. So the next step would be to name it. Name the oppression the comment or action perpetuates. Tell them what they did, because otherwise you might just be making the person confused. So you would say, hey, what you just said was racist. It enforces this unfortunate thing that people consider. So the next thing would be to give information. So give information about why exactly their action perpetuated oppression. And so let's say I don't want to give an example of something racist. It's not. So when you're doing it, explain, okay, let's use blackface as an example, as that's come up a lot recently. Sure.
Do it.
Yeah. Use your own personal experiences.
Hello. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but I think it's relevant to particularly the USC work, but something that I've experienced before. So meeting with a politician, there to talk about cost of tuition, and the politician went on to say that, well, because me, Danny, because I am an international student who has the money to pay the tuition, that everything's fine. So, and I think for me, like, to be in situations like that, like, I can't help but laugh. Like, and it's okay to laugh. I think that it's so comical in situations like that. But I think for me, reflecting back on that and to hear something like your presentation as well, is that for me, it 2 things stick out in mind. One is obviously a misconception that all international students have this ability to pay lots of money, and particularly those who look like me. The second being is because I look the way that I do, that I'm like less Canadian, and so, and you used an example of a meeting, and for me, like it was to the point where it impacts my job, right? I have 30 minutes with an influential politician, and now I have to spend 15 minutes justifying those 2, like trying to argue those 2 points, right? So I might have just gone on a tangent, but I just really wanted to give that example. Because I think it just makes it more real, particularly to the sort of context that we're doing on the day-to-day.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry that happened to you. But that's a very good example of a couple things. First of all, just the assumption based on your race that you're an international student is clearly a racist act. It's also a good example of privilege and how oppression is executed by power. This person is clearly more powerful than you. You're in a meeting with them. And as such, they are able to say something like that, and you're probably not going to call them out on it because they're in a higher power status over you. In a situation where you feel safe to, calling out, giving information on that, you would say something like, actually, I am from Canada, and it was bad of you to assume that because yes, I've also had this similar experience. You then say, actually, I'm from Calgary, which is where I'm from. That's, and then the other person feels somewhat embarrassed, and then it's just an uncomfortable situation. And then the last step would be give directions. So that would be to direct the person to seek out some more information on why what they did was racist, and maybe some resources they can look at in order to make it so that they can hopefully improve in the future and improve their thinking. So in this model, you're challenging someone to improve their actions and attitudes instead of labeling them as irredeemable. So even though you're calling out their actions, you're leaving them in a room to grow as a person. You can use the same process for calling in, but calling in uses that extra process of pulling someone aside and having a private conversation with them. And a reason you might do that is because you don't want to embarrass them in front of other people. Now, in a group setting, calling out may be helpful to establish standards to the rest of the group. So if you are in, say, a group meeting with other students and somebody says something racist, then it may be helpful to call them out to say that type of behavior is not acceptable in this setting.
Okay, just before you continue, that is the end of the allotted time for the presentation. There are about 8 slides left. If anyone would like to motion for an extension, Councillor McGee, how long would you like to motion for?
Oh yeah, we can do it then.
Yeah, okay. I'll look for a seconder to extend for 15 minutes. Councillor Barroso, anyone opposed to extending? Okay, you have 15 more minutes.
Okay, cool. It shouldn't be much longer. Are you done with that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Oh yeah, so what happens when you're called out? Well, so like I said, none of us can know everything. We can't understand every oppression, or we can't be free of all prejudice. We know it's likely that someday someone will call us out on something we say, and personally, I welcome it. I want people to call me out on what I say because I want to grow. So I believe it's really important that anyone brave enough to tell us we've crossed a line, said something ignorant, or done something offensive is doing us a favor. So it might not be easy to hear, but it's really important, especially if the comment is coming from a person who is targeted by the remark or et cetera made. So it's important we listen, we don't argue or be defensive, and we respect how they feel, what they know, and what they have to say. So when you call when you call someone out and challenge them to do better, think about being called out as a challenge for you to do better. So again, we have 4 steps for this. So, breathe, take a deep breath, ask what you've done wrong. Don't react negatively right away. So listen carefully to what the person has to say and try and understand what you did and what they are trying to call you out on. Thank them. So if you can do so genuinely, thank them for going out of their way to challenge you to be a better person. It probably was not easy for them to confront you. So especially if they are a marginalized person themselves. And take action and go think about it. So apologize, look for resources, work to correct your language or anything else in the future. Think about your interactions with others and get a second opinion if you don't understand. Be careful with Google though. As said before, the majority of people in this world don't want to be racist or sexist. The person calling you out is acknowledging this and challenging you to do better. They are acknowledging that you can be better. It's up to you whether or not you wish to accept that challenge and exercise compassion and allyship.
So, concerning safety and calling out, if you're a person of color or a person of color experiencing racist comments or a queer person addressing homophobia or transphobia, there are times when it is truly not safe to interrupt someone who is being oppressive. Like, for example, with the example we used earlier, it's probably not that great for your possible employment future if you are to stop this person and take them aside for 10 minutes and explain what they did was wrong. So there are circumstances where usually your economic, but even your physical safety is at risk if you are to call someone out or call someone in. And if over and over we're forced to hear these sorts of comments or experience this as sort of oppression without being able to respond or protect ourselves, it's important to think about getting outside support. So it's important to make sure you have a support system like supportive friends, families, members of group support, or asking for the names of counselors experienced in dealing with racism, homophobia, domestic violence, or any issues you face. If you are not a member of the group targeted by the oppressive comment that you are hearing, then many of us believe that, hard as it may seem, you have an obligation to speak up and say something. This would be an example where you are to be utilizing your privilege, especially when the action or words is going to be heard by or will affect someone of the targeted group directly.
Oh, this is so small. So this is one of my favorite graphics. It's from the 519, which is a LGBT resource center in Toronto. It's fantastic. They do a lot of cool programming. So these are different ways to support people. So it's a really, really good graphic. So there's 3 different ways. So beside, so you may need to stand beside someone to support them, listen to them, or walk them through an experience. You can stand in front of someone, so you may need to stand in front of someone to help them avoid harm and hurt, and that's an example of using your privilege for good, calling out, etc. Or you may need to stand behind someone to support them, recognize that they're the experts and know what's best, or you need to help uplift their voice, etc. So it's about creating affirming and welcoming social environments, and it's about thinking about how to best practice allyship. So normally I have more tips for allyship. So some suggestions that I brainstormed for allyship, and there's so many different ways you can practice it based on different situations, etc. One of the things is like using resources that are online that are verified, such as the 519, Rainbow Health Ontario, ANOVA locally, and then also using resources by marginalized people, so people who know what they're talking about. You can also do stuff like support campaigns, following groups such as Black Lives Matter Toronto specifically, I love them, to stay up to date on current issues, listening to marginalized peoples, using your privilege to good, giving credit for people when they're working with you and consulting with you, etc. So acknowledging different perspectives, thinking about who is in the room and who is being included and who isn't. And yeah, there's so many different things you can do, really. This is not an exhaustive list. So this is all our information. So you can reach me at Allyship Network at westernusc.ca or on our Facebook page, and we also have an Instagram. We posted a really cute video about allyship. I think it was fun, starring Callie and our other training facilitator. And yeah, that's pretty much it for us. I did not bring feedback forms, so if you have any feedback, please email me.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
If anyone has any questions at this time? Yes, Councillor Campbell.
Hi, Councillor Campbell. Well, first, I just want to thank you both for all the hard work that you do to make this campus more inclusive. How can we make like just this room more inclusive every time we get together?
I would say perhaps, I don't know what other meetings have been like, but encouraging more people to attend these meetings and get a sort of feel for them. This is the first meeting I have attended. I did not know Western had a song. So if you are trying to get people interested in student government, that's one way to do it. If more people are interested in student government, more people know about it, then that makes people more involved and more people will run for positions. So a way to consider that is if people consider that a position is not for someone like them, then they won't even consider looking into it. They won't go for it. That's an example of internalized oppression, because they think that as a member of a certain group that maybe they would not be able to get to the highest level of student government, like this room.
Also, one of the things that I mentioned was acknowledging different perspectives. So thinking about who is there and who is being included and who's left behind. So this year, USC did a really great campaign to get more women involved in government, which is fantastic. There are so many other voices that can be involved in student governance in the future. And so maybe next year, I mean, not everyone's going to be around next year. However, next year, campaigns to include more diverse voices. Also, just thinking about if you're talking about an issue that involves marginalized people and you're not marginalized yourself, consultation is so key. I'm such a big fan of consultation. Reaching out to your communities, just being like, what are your issues? What do you think about this? We're working about this initiative. What are your feelings? And there's so many ways, like there will be perspectives that you've never heard of or never considered, and that can just, it will help your work and it will help the people on this campus as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay, thank you very much for your time and your
Thank you all.
presentation. Okay, next we will have the budget update presentation from the USC Secretary Treasurer.
Hi, everyone. Is this, yeah, is that over? Hi, everyone. So, great, thanks. So I have 5 minutes to give you a quick update on what's been going on. So can you just, yeah, so we have a couple new updates in regards to, I'm sure everyone has heard by now, the recent provincial changes. We've brought it up at a couple meetings so far, so hopefully everyone is kind of aware of what happened with the Student Choice Initiative. But basically, once after the Student Choice Initiative was announced, we were waiting for more information from the government. We got some brief information from the government that basically says that it is up to each university to ensure that they comply with the Student Choice Initiative, much like the free speech that we saw earlier this year. So the issue is no longer a provincial issue. It's now us working with Western collaboratively to come up with a fee schedule that ensures success for the years to come. So the other update that I have is that the Property and Finance meeting will now be April 16th, not the original March deadline that we had planned for, which gives us a lot more time to formulate a fee schedule and be able to comply with this initiative while maintaining a fee schedule that will provide success for the years to come. So documents need to be submitted by April 9th, and that is so far the only concrete deadline that we have. So based on that, we're just figuring out how to work around that and what steps to take next. So I have a handy little graphic. So yeah, at the bottom, April 9th, we need to submit the documents to Property and Finance, and April 16th, the presentation will occur. In terms of council, what that means is that we're not really sure when we're going to be able to bring it to council. Basically, as soon as we have something concrete that we can present, and we have something that is, well thought out fee schedule and document, we'll bring it to council. So I'm not sure what that date will look like, but it could be March 10th at the AGM, it could be April 3rd when the new council meets, or it could be any time basically from now until April 9th that we bring this to council. So we're still working to figure out what the best time for that is. So, yeah, that's all. Any questions? Yes.
Inam Teja, Inam Teja here, I'm President. I'm just wondering if there's any sort of bylaw or any sort of thing in our documents that stipulates which council would have to approve a budget or processes around approving a budget, whether we would have to go beyond the terms or whether it would be okay to just push this off to the next council.
Yeah. Mitchell will answer this one.
Mr. Pratt, USC President. So, Nick Stovey, our head of governance services, has gone through everything, and because how unprecedented the circumstances, it's not even a budget we are looking at here, because we have to know the guaranteed sources of revenue, aka the fees. Before, we would budget off of 100% student buy-in predicated on the fees that were set out in a fee schedule. Now we have to go back to the very bare bones of that process and restructure an entire fee schedule based upon the stipulations given to us by the provincial government. So we will not be able to present a budget in a legitimate sense because we don't know what revenues are coming in. We don't know if 20% students will opt out of some fees. We don't know if 30%, same things like that.
What I think Mitch is trying to say is, due to the nature of this, I mean, there are certain aspects of what we currently do that just won't work in tandem with the student choice initiative. So I think we, basically the government, provincial government changes will always take priority over our own internal bylaws. And so anything that kind of conflicts with that, you have to go back to the provincial government changes first before we go to our bylaws. But obviously we would make changes as necessary based on what the new process might look like. Yes, you can.
Inam Teja Huron, President. Just sort of a follow-up on that. Is there a process in place, or is there maybe a working group from finance and governance regarding how we will need to change our bylaws to be in line with the new government initiative? And is that something we should be looking into?
I would say yes, it's something we should look into, but I think that it's a little bit too early right now to formulate that, just because this technical briefing is already quite new, and we're still collaborating with Western to see what the process will look like. So on our end, we just don't have the information that we could give to that group right now. But as soon as we've kind of figured out on our side how to pull things together, the next step would 100% be to bring it to governance and finance, and whether that would look like a working group or it would be the entire committee. That's sort of like the second step to that. So I'm sure we'll work with something out.
Thank you.
Councillor Yee?
Science President. So just for clarifications on our side, as we are transitioning our new faculty councils, what should their kind of plan be to look at what's going to happen to the faculty grant, and when they'll get a better idea of what that's going to look like given the uncertainties of the budget?
Right. So again, that's a really good question in terms of the faculty grant, since it's obviously something that we do collect. So again, once we have gathered all the information, I think the next step would also be to engage key stakeholders. I've already had a meeting with the affiliates when we thought that our deadline would be a little bit moved up, but now that we have more timelines when we move further, and as soon as we solidify what the fees would look like, and where the faculty grants would even sit, since we don't know at this time, then the next step would be for either myself or Mitchell to engage the faculty council presidents and talk about what that would look like, whether it would be a standalone fee, whether it would be with a different fee, and until we have kind of that part figured out, then we could give you the information to pass on to your next predecessors.
So for that timeline, are we also looking at around April-ish then, for the new council would be the ones who kind of get that information?
Yes, I would aim around then, because if we're presenting it to Property and Finance at that time, then we're assuming that we'd have at least something sort of worked out for then. So I would aim for around then to get some sort of update from us.
Okay, there's no other questions? No? Okay, thank you very
Great,
much.
thanks.
All right, so we will now move on to our for action section. For this evening, we have 3 motions, 2 from Student Experience and 1 from our Advocacy Standing Committee. We will start with the motion to establish an Orientation Week Mental Health Working Group. This motion was moved by Councillor Campbell and seconded by Councillor Danesi. Councillor Campbell, would you like to speak to this motion?
There we go. Okay, Councillor Campbell. So I'll briefly outline how this motion came to be. So I'm also sitting on Active Minds advocacy team, and so we've been working on initiating more mental health resources and somewhat of a campaign during orientation. And so this was, we found the most effective way to ensure that mental health is prioritized during O Week. And so the reason why we think that O Week is a great place to entrench mental health resources is because first years come, and this is where the culture of Western is established. This is where you learn what it's like to be a Western student and where the expectations kind of emerge. And so this may, like, we cannot necessarily address the widespread nature of the stigma that surrounds mental health with this one motion. However, hopefully it will have long-term implications if year after year, first years it's extremely clear to them that mental health is a priority here at Western. And from a personal standpoint, this is particularly important to me. When I was actually sitting down to write this motion, my sister FaceTimed me from home and told me that she had just gotten accepted to Western. And so I am extremely proud to go to Western, but I'm also very critical of the mental health stigma that is still on campus. And so I don't want my younger sister, who I love dearly, to ever feel as though she cannot talk about things that is going on in her life because of the stigma. And so it's like I have that personal connection to it, but everyone does. It's everyone's sister, everyone's friend. And I think we all have those relationships right now that can tie back to this motion. So that is why I've worked with Karina. I've met with many different counselors on this, like in this room. And so like this wasn't the first thing that I went to Karina with. And through working with her, we've created changes to make sure that there's tangible and actionable items from it.
Councillor Dinesi, would you like to speak to this motion?
Yeah, Peter Dinesi, Science Counselor. I'll just kind of expand on the whole creation of the actual motion. So like Anne had said, this isn't how we originally formed the motion, but after talking to Karina and talking to, I know Anne spoke to some of you and other stakeholders, we decided that this was kind of the best way to go about it. And I just kind of want to demonstrate that that's kind of an advantage of sort of the committee process, that we flushed out the issues and brought what we think is a feasible motion to council. The kind of original idea was to maybe give the incoming SPO sort of more, I guess, autonomy to create sort of a campaign or something centered around mental health. And it was very wisely pointed out that, you know, there's no guarantee that an incoming SPO is going to have the expertise necessary to do that. So that's why we sort of made it a working group model where we're incorporating different stakeholders from all around campus. So I do think this is the best approach to go about it. And you can let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions regarding this motion? Councillor Macaulay?
Erin Macaulay, Ivy Councillor. I was just wondering why you made the decision not to include the associate orientation or any other orientation staff, because I know that they have a lot of initiatives surrounding mental health, and so I wouldn't want to see work doubled up.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so as to my understanding, the SPO supervises that role. Correct me if I'm wrong. And so then, like the student representative. And so I think that if you look in the motion, it says included but not limited to. So this is just an example of stakeholders that can be included. Like if we want to include directly in the motion, like those stakeholders, like I totally support that. This was just a short list of examples.
Councillor Tasia?
I'm Teja, Huron President. I'm just wondering if you considered whether or not it was appropriate to have affiliate representation on such working group. Typically, we have different mental health supports on our campus and whatnot. Not sure if this is the best group for affiliate representation or not, but wondering if you have any rationale for including it or not including it.
I think, like, just to go off a similar argument, just like this is included but not limited to, and so if affiliates feel as though it's necessary to have representation on this council, and that potentially, like, this is a working group to establish like an idea for a campaign, generally to like provide the background, and then it's for the SPO to initiate that campaign. And I think that it's almost to the discretion of the SPO. So if it's clear that there are discrepancies between the services, between main campus and affiliates, either the SPO can address that themselves, or like if you feel as though it's needed, like it could be included in the working group.
Councillor O'Connor?
Jordan O'Connor, social science counselor. I guess just looking for some clarification about what makes this working group different from the working group also known as the community of practice that's called health and wellness that already exists within the orientation program, that has a bunch of key stakeholders and does have affiliate representation on it as well. What makes this different, and like why is it relevant?
Well, I can just highlight that. For example, so as like, I think as counselors, I think that we think that we kind of know how to get things done. Like you put forward a motion and there's like tangible action. And so, but I think I was proven wrong through this process. Being on Active Minds, I felt as though it was extremely difficult to create change. The amount of people that we met with in the orientation program, there was extreme barriers in order to create change. And this is something that is extremely important as in mental health. And so I think that creating something, and I in no way want to belittle the work that has been already done. However, I think that this working group gives us more authority to ensure that there is something tangible at the end of it, and that student voices are involved, and that we're ensuring that groups like Gender Equality Network, all of those types of things that may not be at the table there, I can't say exactly, but I think that this gives us as a council more discretion, and I think that also it will be beneficial to have two incoming counselors sit on it as well, so that we're accountable to this group and to all the students here at Western.
Any other questions regarding this motion? Okay, we will now enter debate on this motion. Councillor O'Connor?
Jordan O'Connor, social science counselor. Speaking against this motion, I actually have sat on the health and wellness committee within the orientation program for the last 2 years. And I think Anne's point is right. It is difficult to get things done when you're dealing with an institution. But I would like to point out that there is a lot of student representation on the committee. So I have the list here in front of me of who actually would sit on the committee within the orientation program. So it's the Wellness Education Coordinator, the Sexual Violence Prevention Coordinator, a representative from Psychological Services, a representative from Student Health Services, a representative from Residence Counseling, which is in housing, a representative from Sports and Recreation, the Sustainability Manager, so from Facilities Management, the Manager of Student Wellness is from King's, the Student Orientation Coordinator, so that could be anyone who sits as a coordinator on the Operations Committee. A standing member of the Operations Committee, so that's someone who is like more of a facilitator. So Doreen from King's, Angela from Brescia, that kind of a thing. 4 heads-offs, or some number of that. So those are the student voices especially, and a representative from faculty or affiliate councils. So that's who kind of sits on the committee, and having sat on them, there's a lot of good work that's done. It's very proactive, and it's a lot of like brainstorming and figuring out what we want to do and how we can better the program. And I think that a lot of it is also anyone is welcome to sit on any COP, and the SPO is always more than welcome to come and sit on them, and also so is the associate orientation. And any SOF or who has concerns is more than welcome to bring up their issues. So I'm just very concerned about the idea of counselors making policy and making ideas when they're not really steeped in the orientation program and don't really know the ins and outs of how our governmental system works and of how our operations works. And I'm not saying that consultation is important. It definitely is, and I would definitely welcome any counselor to kind of come and like talk about it and everything. But I just think it's kind of redundant to have an entire working group that's been set up already within the orientation program with people who really know what's going on. And then also a separate one that has no really ties to the orientation program, because it kind of seems like we're going to tell them what we think we should do, but we're not really steeped in the experience. So, yeah.
President Pratt?
like to defer my speaking rights to Karina Gabriel, the Student Programming Officer.
Hello. So I kind of wanted to say a couple of things. First and foremost, thank you to Councillor Campbell for bringing this forward, and we had a discussion about this, and so I just wanted to bring up a couple points. First and foremost, I agree 110% on the idea and the importance of mental wellness and talking about mental health during orientation week. Orientation week is an extremely important time in our students in welcoming to this campus and during the transition period. However, there are some disagreements that I have, and Councillor Campbell, is aware of these, so I'm just going to talk about a couple of them. I fundamentally agree, actually, with Councillor McCauley and Councillor O'Connor around utilizing the resources that exist and talking about the people that currently exist in these roles, so such as the associate orientation or such as the community practice that currently exist around health and wellness, because, and first and foremost, because while I think it's really wonderful to have initiatives like this, that COP exists with the resources, with the people that exist on them. And counselors are more than welcome to be attending those. And if you have an invested interest in this, we'd be more than welcome to invite you to those meetings. The only problem is that they're during the summer, right? So even creating an initiative like this and integrating council members on it, it's not that it's impossible to do. Some of you are here during the summer and we'd love to have your involvement, but those COPs exist that are having those conversations. Additionally, a program like this, I worry because I think this was somewhat modeled, or potentially my gender-based violence, sexual consent buttons came up in our conversation. And I was able to do that because that's research that I did in my undergrad. I understand the community resources very well. I had the resources in the summer to be able to execute that, and it was an executive initiative. So I was able to do that. And it worked well, and it started conversations. However, in things around mental health, I worry about any student programs officer being able to come into this role and effectively create an initiative for 5,000 extremely impressionable students about mental health supports. And it's not that the SPO is not capable of doing it, it's just I worry about putting that responsibility on student programs officers if they're not experts in that field. We have a COP that is specifically dedicated to doing work like this and creating a full-fledged initiative around mental health, and it's such an important topic for September of 2019 is rushed, especially when our students leave for 4 months during the summer. And a COP already exists in order to be doing this work year long and addressing the systemic problem, not creating an initiative that might come and go during orientation week, but something that addresses it for the year long. So those are kind of my opinions on it. However, I'd just like to express again, this kind of work is incredibly important and your involvement is really, really valued. Just those are my feelings on it.
Thank you. Councillor Danesi?
Peter Danesi, Science Counselor. Just speaking for this motion, maybe I just kind of want to clarify some of the misconceptions that are out there. I don't think anyone's implying that this working group is somehow going to override or go against or not kind of acknowledge the existence of the community of practice that exists already with the orientation program. I would probably imagine that in theory they would actually work with them to implement this. A lot of the people that Councillor O'Connor listed are not students, and that kind of stuck out to me. So the whole idea of this group is that it's very student-driven. The coordinators and kind of associates and I guess services that we listed there that are mostly under the SPO portfolio are presumably hired because they have expertise in this area. And I do think it is valuable to bring those expertise opinions to the table for kind of discussion like this. We're not mandating that any sort of kind of campaign be formed. That is the ultimate goal of the working group. And if they decide that that isn't feasible or they want to take a different approach, I think that's something that a working group should have the discretion to do and probably does within this current framework. And I do understand that we're not going to be able to solve every problem in time for Orientation Week 2019. I do think that is a kind of hard, good timeline to have set, though, and that way we can make as much progress to it as possible towards that.
Councillor Anthony? Okay, thank you. Councillor Campbell?
Okay, Councillor Campbell speaking in favor of this motion. So just in regards to where this motion came from, so yes, a lot of it came down to the absence of a yes as a no campaign. So I was the social science off this year, and so it was very clear every single time you walked around campus that the absence of yes was a no. And so as we go into the meetings to meet with the SPO, I don't know if it's necessarily fair for us to just pick a SPO based on their experience in one particular area. So if mental health is important for me, I do look for that in a SPO, but I also look for many different abilities. And so I don't think that we should shy away from different initiatives due to the experience just of the SPO. And I think that this is a way for us to get that student perspective and ensure that we are accountable to students. And so that in no way do I think that this counteracts the working group that's already there. Just to reiterate Councillor Dinesi's point, like, this is temporary. This is just for this summer, and potentially can have, like, if we see it as being beneficial, it could go longer term. But I think it just comes back to the idea that it, like, initially it was just the idea of the SPO creating like some type of movement, some type of small initiative, and this is just making sure that the student perspective is there.
Councillor Fernandez.
I'd like to defer my speaking rights to Frankie.
Frankie, Science President, just want to say I am in favor of this motion. I do think that when it comes to this is a very good step forward for us to work as a community to address the culture that is at this university and at many different universities surrounding mental health. As I think some of the students that were on a community of practice this year, I do see the value in these committees. But just speaking from my experience being on the equity and diversity community of practice, this year what I really found with that position was how I wish that there was a resource or there was a committee or a group of students that I could go and kind of get that feedback to bring to these community of practices, right? And I think that this working group is a good resource for that. This working group allows us to kind of move forward and to have this additional avenue to making sure we work together to address mental health. So for me, I don't necessarily see this as a concern of being, I guess, causing friction between the community of practice or not bringing in that perspective that's associated with orientation. But I do think that it is sometimes also very important to kind of look outside of your own personal bubbles and your own personal kind of community and your own networks and see what outside perspectives there are as well. So for me, I see more of this as working and being very congruent with these community of practices and being able to support them in the work that they do and also bring in additional benefits as well.
Councillor Malioko.
Hello, Ariana Malioko, FIMS SE President. Point of information, what would be the process for adding new members to a community of practice that may have been in some of the groups that you've identified? Because I take the point that we want more students on there. So I guess that's the first question, is what is that process? Who gives approval or not? And the second is there a capacity to have a working group within the community of practice so that we're not having parallel conversations but kind of cushioned within the community of practice itself?
Sure. Councillor O'Connor.
That's a great question, actually. Last year I sat on a working group within the working group that did a survey. We sent a survey out to all of our SOFs, our student leaders, that kind of asked about their experience with mental health and how we as an orientation program could better support them, and some really great initiatives came from that. So there definitely is the opportunity to create a working group within a working group, much like we do here. The key thing with that is that the important thing about that was that I was a student, so I knew just like having the experience as a student leader how important our SOF's mental health was, but I am not an expert in it. So I got to work with Melanie Ann, who was the Wellness Education Coordinator, and Andrew Sauvé, who is from Psychological Services. So I really got that actual professional insight and opinion. They really helped shape the survey. So that's why I think it's a good example of, so there is the opportunity. In terms of adding people to, and Karina can probably speak on this as well, in terms of adding people to a community of practice, the community practices, there is a terms of reference, they're set, and they've been developed through consultations. We used to have a completely different government system, but we moved to this last year, and we're still working out some of the kinks. But I'm not sure if it would have to go through operations or advisory, but those are our two governing bodies that kind of tell us what we are allowed to do, and advisory is high level, like Jenny Massey from Student Experience sits on it, John Dirksen, Karina sits on it, they're high level, important people, and then operations is they're still important, but slightly less high level than those people, so it would have to go through those two bodies. Because I would like to point out that orientation, the USC is a major partner in orientation, but it's not the only partner.
I just wanted to thank Councillor O'Connor was just asking for some, I think, a little clarification on where it would go in terms of ratifying. So any policies that come forward in terms of amending any terms of reference would be going to the advisory committee, of which I'm a co-chair. So it would have to be proposed through one of the members, from my understanding, or we could talk about it, and then the amendments would have to be proposed, put through advisory, presented, and then voted on. That's how that works.
Councillor Hunter?
Councillor Hunter, Brescia president, speaking in favor for this motion. I do think this would be beneficial. I do think there needs to then be some type of consultation with the community practice groups, and I think that could be existing if it's mandated that the SPO then goes, attends those meetings, explains what initiatives they decided at that working group. I think if there's more people working on an issue, that's never a problem. Also, for point of information, I was wondering if there's any international groups that could be included in this, because I think that might be a gap right now, but I'm not sure. Just being at Brescia, I know our international resource, but I'm not too sure about main campus, but I think that should be added in.
Yeah, for example, like just going back to the point that this was including but not limited to, and so that is for sure something that could be like at the discretion of the SPO should be included.
Councillor Tasia?
I'm Teja Huron, President, speaking against the motion. I think I have a couple reasons why I think that there's potential to maybe improve on this idea or have an alternate way of solving the problem that Councillor Campbell pointed out, because I do think that it is frustrating to get some student changes to the orientation program. I think that Karina pointed out some really good logistical issues with the current working group. I think when you have groups running in parallel, it can get really messy in terms of reporting lines, in terms of even if the intent there is to supplement each other, it often gets to where one group's running ahead with one idea and one's not. And I think that rather than having them run parallel, it would be better to have something sort of integrated. I think maybe an idea that has been floated around is the ability for students to put forward policy proposals to the COP. Because it does meet over the summer, a working group that's permanent may not be the best solution to get more student voices and ideas out there, but perhaps if students who have policy ideas specifically instead of generally would have a proposal that they could put together to submit to the COP, that might be a better way to get specific changes to occur rather than a general working group. And I also think that the sort of revamp of the orientation structure that occurred in the last few years is still new, but it was very intentional in a way that all the committees fit together to sort of have this proper reporting line and to make sure nothing gets missed. And because it's new, there are still kinks, but I think that it's sort of an intentional design, and I'd rather not sort of make these patchwork working groups fit on top and parallel with it.
Councillor Kamenetsky?
Nicole Kamenetsky, Social Side Counselor. So to expand on what Anam said, what would your thoughts be on, instead of mandating specific nuances of how you would like to see certain initiatives be completed, what if we open up the opportunity to all clubs, councils, groups, organizations on council to submit event proposals to the SPO or anybody involved in orientation to, on their own time, put together the necessary research, conduct all operations needed in order to make sure that these are feasible initiatives that can happen during orientation, because it is so important, of course, to include all of these different committees and people in expressing certain ideas, but in the interest of efficiency, we can't realistically be working on all of these different things all at the same time, especially because it's been mentioned a couple of times that the same people would be sitting on multiple committees. So rather than the USC taking on this big project, if we just open up the door to anybody to do anything realistically, as long as it's feasible and approved by the SPO orientation, etc., I feel like that would be more efficient.
Councillor Anthony?
Oh, no. Cool. Chris Anthony, King's Councillor, speaking against the motion. I guess probably, as Councillor O'Connor said, she said that as part of the COP that there are faculty councils and affiliate council representatives on these COPs. So there already is, from what Councillor O'Connor said, there already is that representation of councils on these COPs. So I feel that having more than one COP, although it is important, more than one focus group on mental health, although mental health is absolutely very important, I just don't want to see any redundancy almost and overlapping of work, and just have it focused on orientation. And then I guess a point of information for Karina. For these COPs, is there a consultation mechanism already in place where they can invite outside groups into these COPs, or is it still like, is it just very internal? I was just wondering how that works.
Thanks for the question. Yes, I'm fairly positive that for the majority of them, whenever it requires some kind of exterior invitation in order for a presentation, like it's not something that is unheard of. Additionally, there's a lot of research that's conducted by the members of the COPs by going to external groups. So say, for example, if there's something around gender-based violence during orientation week, committee members would go to resources in the campus and the London community in order to gather information about what exists, what's the context, what's our scope, et cetera, and trying to understand. So absolutely, like outside resources do come in and are researched for the COPs.
So then just to reiterate then, groups like Active Minds Western could be contacted for the COP.
Yes. Actually, when I talked with them last year about an initiative like this, I encouraged them to be giving us recommendations, which I intended to give to the COP.
Fantastic, thank you.
Vice President Chang?
Hello, Vice President Danny Chang. Speaking in favor of the spirit of this motion, but I would suggest for someone to refer it back to committee, given that I think, I don't want us to spend so much time going into the nitty-gritty when I think we can have some much more meaningful discussions, particularly when if it were to go back to the Student Experience Committee. The reason why I am saying so is that I think there are some logistical barriers that were brought up. A significant part of that is the fact that the timeline for implementation is very short, and it's based on the expectation that the USC's coordinators are able to be an active part of this discussion during the summertime. Also, given the fact that the reason why the community of practices exist with diverse representation is that, particularly on items such as mental health, there are individuals who have master's level, PhD level degrees related to facilitating this for such an integral part of transition into university life. But to Councillor Campbell's principles behind why this is coming forward, I agree on them. So I would suggest for someone to refer it back to committee. I would say that as a current U.S. executive, I'm just saying to all of you that I'm going to be choosing to abstain from this, given that this, for example, the consent buttons were an executive initiative led by the current student programs officer, and given that we are a part of transition, and so we work with them on the incoming executive. This is tasking the incoming executive on something that was built based on an executive initiative. So I'll be choosing to abstain, but I would suggest someone refer this back to Student Experience.
Councillor Barroso?
Victoria Barroso, Science Counselor. Before I motion to do anything, I just had two questions. I don't know if I can ask those, but in the motion there, you mentioned CMHA as one of the community groups, I guess, that you would bring onto this committee. How feasible is bringing like an organization like that into something that is primarily consisted of like student groups?
Well, I think the idea of it is that I think that there's a misinterpretation of the concept of the working group in this context. For example, I think a lot of it is going to be used for consultation, and so having CMHA there is to provide the SPO with the resources. And so I think that just in regards to some of the things that have been brought up is that, like, I agree that there are structures that are in place and that they are new. But my fear is that if we do not act, if we do not take initiative, I think that we are letting somewhat the bureaucratic barriers hold us back from creating actual change. And so I think that there's a bit of a misinterpretation of what the final result of this is. I think that it's providing a potential campaign. With that, it doesn't have to be large scale. However, it has been addressed that it is going to be beneficial to have more people on this issue. I don't think that that is a negative thing, to have more people working and advocating for students' mental health on campus. I don't know what it's going to have to take for someone to say, enough is enough. And so that's why I'm speaking in favor of this.
I just want to clarify. What I meant wasn't necessarily the number of people on the committee. It's because CMHA is an outside organization. How would you be able to mandate somebody from the organization to be on the committee?
No, I see what you're saying. I think it would be, so for example, we go to them with an idea.
Point of order. Madison, can we limit crosstalk between points? That's potential, just in interest of time. No disrespect to either of you as well.
Actually, I think at this point I'm going to ask for a mover to refer to committee. There's just too much going on that's round and round. Councillor Barroso, and a seconder, Councillor Tasia. All those in favor of referring this motion to the Student Experience Committee? Okay, that motion passes. The motion has been referred to committee. Okay, moving on to our next motion, the motion to approve the Public Arts Commission review. This motion has been moved by Councillor Liu and seconded by Councillor Kamenetsky. Councillor Liu is not here this evening, so Councillor Kamenetsky. Oh, unless the proxy likes to speak, sure.
Hello. Hi. Arts Humanities President speaking as the proxy for Cecilia Liu. I am deferring Cecilia's speaking rights to Councillor Genesi.
Yes, glad we got that out of the way. So this is another one of our program reviews that came through the Student Experience Standing Committee, very similar to the early outreach review that we brought at the last meeting. So we did this review from the ground up in collaboration with the Public Arts Commissioner and taking them into account throughout the whole process. So this is just kind of the approval of the research and the recommendations, and you can let us know if you have any questions.
Okay, Councillor Kamenetsky, would you like to speak to this motion? She's not here. Okay. Anyone have any questions regarding this motion? Councillor Tasia?
I'm Tasia, Huron President. I just have a question about the review process in general. Is there any sort of section or discussion that comes up in terms of the service outreach to affiliate campuses?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there was no specific discussion that came up during this conversation in terms of outreach to affiliate campuses. Now, if that's maybe something you're concerned about, I don't know if that's something we could look at as more a long-term thing, like having coordinators and stuff focus on affiliates more. I don't know if that's maybe an ongoing issue or concern you have, but no, there was nothing in this, to my knowledge, that came up specifically with that.
Okay, any other questions regarding this motion? Okay, seeing none, we will enter debate on this motion. And seeing no debate on this motion, we will call to question. Okay, polls are now open. Okay, 3, 2, 1, polls are closed, and the motion passes unanimously. Okay, moving on to our final for action for this evening, the motion to amend community standards policy to include discrimination against identifiable groups. This motion was moved by Councillor Tasia and was seconded by Councillor Murray. Councillor Tasia, would you like to speak to this motion?
So, Inam Tasia, Huron President. Just in terms of some context behind this motion, this is a follow-up to the motion that was previously passed by this council regarding the definition of anti-Semitism in our community standards policy. The outcome of that previous decision was to look into the ways of outlining and highlighting discrimination and other forms of discrimination on campus. This went through a vigorous working group process, and then it came to a advocacy standing committee meeting, and the discussion around that is that most marginalized groups or many forms of discrimination don't have a clear internationally recognized definition in the same way that anti-Semitism does, as well as any definitions that we come up with could be contested, could be exclusionary, and might be problematic in their own ways if we try and sort of define all the different forms of marginalization that come out of this. And so a decision was made at the working group level and then at the advocacy standing committee level to support that. We use the Ontario Human Rights Code as a including but not limited to way to define the other pieces of discrimination that we wanted to bring forward in the community standards, policy.
Councillor Murray, would you like to speak to this motion?
Hello? Okay, perfect. So yeah, basically everything Inam said, I obviously support 100%. And then also one of the most important points I think the working group and then the advocacy standing committee as well has, we explicitly outlined in this session at the beginning, or it was one of the first be it resolved, was that we continue to, as the USC, continue to officially recognize IRA's definition of anti-Semitism. That was one thing that we really wanted to make clear, that we're not reversing that, we're just adding on to it. But everything else.
Okay, thank you. Any questions regarding this motion? Councillor Hollenberg?
Hopefully this isn't, sorry, Joshua Hollenberg, Law Councilor. Hopefully this isn't too romantic, but were there to be additional things added onto here in addition to the Ontario Human Rights Code that would contradict the Human Rights Code, which would take precedence, the Human Rights Code or the alternative measures that were added to the motion or the bylaw?
So are you sort of referencing if the Ontario Human Rights Act were to change, or what would the alternatives be?
Yes, go ahead.
The motion as it's written is including but not limited to, so that would imply the ability to include a separate standard, and if there were conflict between that separate standard and the Human Rights Code, which would take precedence? Could we introduce something that would override the application of the Ontario Human Rights Code?
Councillor Murray, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I think it was more like including but not limited to was that if there was any group that wasn't included in the Human Rights Code, which is already a pretty kind of expansive list, it would be in like conjunction with, it wouldn't take precedence over, and the Human Rights Code wouldn't take precedence over, it would be like working together. So I'm not sure that we would place any importance over anything else. They would be working together. Does that answer your question?
Councillor Malioko?
Yeah, I was just going to say to clarify that currently the policy only says hatred against any identifiable groups. So it's already been something that is vague in the sense that how you determine what those identifiable groups don't have clear parameters. So we're just pointing to the Human Rights Code as one way to define those parameters. In the same way that it's currently laid out, it is expansive, and if a student constituents come up and want to have a discussion, that line of communication is open to have.
Okay, any other questions on this motion? Vice President Chang?
Vice President Danny Chang. I just had a question about, two questions, I apologize. Actually no, just the one. How does this, do we know how this coincides with either the, as really mandated, the freedom of expression policy, as well as anything related to community standards that has been discussed at the clubs level related to any communications with campus clubs, because it would appear that this largely would affect a lot of clubs on campus.
Councillor Tasia, would you like to respond?
Inam Teja, Huron President. I think the idea behind this this amendment to the standards policy is to really put us in line with the standards at the provincial level. And so the provincial level is sort of the law of the land. And so in making this amendment, we're just supporting that as the precedent in a sense. So when it comes to the club's policies in terms of being in line with what the club's policies indicate, that's wouldn't change because of this. This is more so if there is maybe on the club's policy, instead of going directly to the previous version of this policy, which didn't really have any laid out definitions, it would just revert to the Ontario Human Rights Act, which is essentially where it would go after that anyways.
Councillor O'Connor?
Hi, okay. Just following up on that, the reason we actually, because we talked about this in the working group, and the specific reason we put in the Ontario Human Rights Code is for that purpose, because obviously the Ontario Rights Code is law and it follows the Charter, which is the whole point of our Constitution. So the freedom of expression policy, you know, if that's not in accordance with the Ontario Human Rights Code, that may be a provincial issue that we should discuss.
Okay, any other questions on the motion? Yes, go ahead.
And just as a point of information, it's not in violation of any club's policy. I checked prior to the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions before we enter debate? Okay, seeing none, we will enter debate on this motion. Seeing no debate on this motion, we will call to question. Polls are now open. Okay, 3, 2, 1, polls are closed. And the motion passes unanimously. Okay, at this time, we will perform our USC test election via the Simply Voting link that you should have received via email. I know Councillor Dinesi received the email from earlier today. Did anyone else who is a regular member of council not receive the email? No? Okay. Everyone received it? If you could all, at this time, go and log into Simply Voting and cast your vote on your favorite superhero. I'm very eager to see the... Okay, please, this is an election, people. Please keep it civil. Is anyone having any issues?
Lack of choice.
I'm sorry, I didn't create the election.
Point of information, Madam Speaker.
Sorry, who's speaking? Oh, yes, Councillor Teja.
Councillor
Hello.
Teja, Huron President. Should we be seeing a ranked ballot here, or?
No, we're just wanting to make sure that the login worked and that you could actually vote. Thank you, though.
Got you, thanks.
Actually, just on that note, as far as proxies are concerned, for the AGM, make sure you are sending me your proxy forms by next Wednesday night, because, as I mentioned, I think post in a Facebook or an email, I can't quite remember, the links for the AGM will be sent to your proxies directly. So we need those couple days after you've submitted your proxy forms to ensure that we have the right emails and that your proxies are receiving the emails so that they can vote on your behalf at the AGM. Thank you. Okay, if everyone's completed the test election and everyone's had success. Yeah, Councillor Sawyer. So we are, myself and the CRO, trying to figure out exactly when, but probably next Friday. Yeah, an email will be sent out. Yes. But, okay, sounds good. Okay, we are going to move on with the rest of our agenda, and we come to the for information section of our agenda. And we'll start with our executive reports.
Sorry, I'm not accustomed to standing in front of the room this early in the evening. Danny, I'll just leave the laptop up.
All right, everyone, listen up. We have our executive reports.
All right. Hello, everyone. If you don't know me, I'm Mitch. So, launching right into the executive report. So, completed. So, the Homecoming Task Force. So, this was kind of the, if you've been looking at the media recently, there's been a lot of conversation surrounding homecoming in Brofdale recently. This is because the Homecoming Task Force has started up. And so, this is an initiative between the city, the police force, the fire department, and Western University and the University Student Council to collectively come to the table as community members to figure out what is the best route forward for community and student safety. And I really want to not only thank my team, but the organization for all their hard work and dedication to advocating issues, because frankly, when we came into this role in May, none of these parties were sitting at the table together. And initially, we announced in our partners' breakfast speech when I was announced our intention to create some form of a committee to address this before the end of the year. And it was achieved. And so, hey, advocacy works. Sorry, Danny, stealing it. All right, so we had our first community meeting. So on Monday night from 7 to 9 p.m., I spoke to many friendly members of the London community who had a lot of opinions and solutions to say about their thoughts on Brofdale and local student issues. Of course, I did my part in administering my opinions that I believe that this is a problem. We need to keep analyzing the culture surrounding this date moving forward, and that includes the standing policy of council moving the homecoming date back. As well as talking about our contributions as students. I apologize to them that this is the only flashpoint in which the London locals seem to take notice of every year, but we do a lot of good work in the community and also provide a lot of economic benefit to the London community on the whole. So moving forward. So Purplefest 2019. Hello, it is happening. All right, so the largest university concert in Canada is here to stay for another year. Lil Uzi's last festival ever, he crossed the border, we did it, I'm sorry. But basically, we have never actually implemented 2 years of large-scale programming. In 2015, there was HOCO on the Hill, and 2017, there was HOCO in the city. It has always been 1 year stop, 1 year stop. There is never for the UC executive and successive executives to establish a brand over something that could become a large-scale cultural piece at this university, and we are super excited to start planning and start working with next year's executive to put firm plans in place so they do not have to scramble to pull off glorified University Fire Festival, because that's essentially what the timeline we were working on and implementing last year. And I'm not exaggerating. I watched the movie with my roommates, and it was very stress-inducing for me. But yeah, so moving forward. So elections. So congratulations to all candidates. Congratulations to Team Bardia Cat and also to the slate for ye. You go through fantastic campaigns, and I really appreciate your courage in putting your names forward, because it is not in any positions to run elections for. So I really thank all candidates who put their names forward. It was an inspiration for us, having all gone through elections ourselves, to see so many passionate young leaders committing themselves to this organization that we call home. So thank you for that. Okay, so UCR strategic plan. So the undergraduates of research-intensive universities, as you know, I'm the federal advocacy organization, similar to our federal USA, if not more grassroots in nature. So we're looking towards a more formalized approach to the organization. So we're going to be creating a strategic plan, and Danny is also leading the policy working group. I'm sure he would talk about that, moving into the 2019 federal election, because it's very important to build momentum for federal advocacy initiatives. All right, so comm/sec-tresh hirings are ongoing. Thank you to Jack and Ariana for all your hard work as council representatives as well as thank you to Karina and Andrea for all your hard work and vetting each of these candidates. I mean, sorry, Michaela and Andrea, all of you are to me, I apologize. Yes, so moving forward, so transitioning planning is starting to ramp up. The current executive, as they can start to cycle in and out of the office, we also need to respect, if you are asking questions of the current executive, I really want you to respect their times as students. They're never going to get the experience of being a student again before the end of the year, so make sure you're representing all the incoming executive times, I think, so they can graduate, they can spend time with themselves, because elections are not an easy process. It's always great to recover from them. So supporting Andrea in fees process. So Danny and I are working with Andrea in terms of supporting her to help with negotiations moving forward. Operationalizing the USC Foundation. So the USC Foundation, if you remember, that was the charity initiative that was started it was actually launched last semester. So the USC Foundation was a group of former USC alumni who are donating money directly towards this charitable organization. So we have charitable status, and now we can start moving forward to action some of the donations that have been pledged. As was mentioned before, there was $1 million in donations pledged by past alumni based upon the pillars of sexual violence prevention and education, mental health and wellness activities, and as well as experiential learning for the USC. And so in a post-student choice environment, the USC Foundation could a fantastic opportunity to continue to sustain the same level of programming and services you see on this campus as well. All right, to come. So executive changes. So I'm not sure if any of you have heard, but there was a motion that went forward to Governance and Finance Committee regarding some structural changes to how the elected executives are elected. And in the simplest terms possible, as I've described to some of you in person. What the changes entail essentially would be a president being elected at large. The slate system would be broken up. The VP would be moving to an internal election process similar to SPO, and the SPO would be moved to a community hiring process. And so I wanted to just put that out there for all of you to know now, because we will be discussing this motion at AGM. So any member of this group up here, we would not be putting these changes forward unless we purely and believed in them and knew that it was best for this organization. And so we're happy to talk with any one of you who have questions or concerns or about our rationale, about the research we've been putting into this, and we're going to be pumping a lot more information coming forward. And last thing I want to add is the governance and finance meeting is at 6:30 p.m. tomorrow. And committee meetings are open to any counselors who would like to come and attend and share their thoughts, hear what debate is going on, and want to see the best version of this motion put forward to council. So that location is TBA. I'm looking for a larger room right now. Oh, it's a room right beside us tomorrow. Thank you, Michaela, for booking that today. And basically, at 6:30 p.m., if you're curious to see how this motion is formulated and brought forward before AGM, I encourage you to attend. So, thank you. Sorry, I forgot that part. Nicole. 269. Any other questions at this point in time? Thank you.
Thanks, Karina. Great. Before I begin, just to piggyback off that last comment, for those of you who've been asking me, I did know those executive changes were coming. Support it. So just as a clarification, I'll be in a car ride to USA tomorrow, so I won't be at the governance and finance meeting. Okay, great. So it's always really hard to see my slide. I'm sorry. On the university sort of file, so I always break it up into university, municipal, provincial, federal. On the university file, one thing that will be coming to the AGM is our policy paper on international students. Is going to Advocacy Standing Committee tomorrow. Really great, really appreciative of the Allyship Network, as well as Kat Dunn, who's my Associate Vice President. You may know her, who essentially led consultation groups throughout last semester with international students across campus, worked very closely with International Student Services, and likely will have some really strong recommendations for the USC moving forward, coming out of that policy paper, so be on the lookout for that. Also, a lot of the peer program portfolio has worked very closely with my team as well to create sort of an official consultation process for the USC when it comes to a range of issues across campus, and so you'll see that at AGM as well. But that's something that we've worked very closely with all of the peer programs, the Allyship Network, Pride Western, everybody pretty much. So, and that's the work of the political advisory committee that exists between my portfolio and Karina's, which will be going to Advocacy Committee tomorrow as well as the AGM. Fall Reading Week Review Update. So cool update. We have a working group out of SCAPA through Senate on Fall Reading Week. And currently, the consensus between faculty and student leaders and taking sort of feedback that we've heard from students and working through a group of the VP academics and the equivalents of your faculty councils and and the affiliate councils as well. We've heard that the Reading Week break currently has been a bit too early for students. It seems like there is an interest to push to the Reading Week to the week of October 28th to align with a lot of academic policies, to align with academic considerations. So that's currently sort of, I believe, where the committee is headed currently. I do know that that falls on the week of Halloween, but we know that the bars, and it's very creative, so really working our way around it. But timing-wise, it's great. I would say that, you know, going through academic policies and getting not only students and but also faculty and administrators on board, it seems like, one, the biggest thing is they want to keep the week, which is great. And two, they want to make sure that the timing's right for students, because ultimately they're concerned because it doesn't matter to them when they administer a test. I think, but part of that, which is a tougher conversation, is related to the 15% rule, where you have to get 15% of your mark before the add drop date. I think the concerns that were brought up were that, particularly for third and classes, difficult to administer that, and a lot of professors already kind of get, they talk with administration within the faculty to kind of get around that, and also is not necessarily indicative of your well-being in a course, particularly for the upper year courses, but for first and second year courses, they recognize it's a big thing. So currently the sentiment on the committee is to keep the 15% first for 1,000 and 2,000 level courses, but consider getting rid of it for 3,000 and 4,000 level courses. So if you have any concerns with that, please reach out to me, get feedback from your faculty councils, but that's kind of where faculty are at currently. The last piece is medical note, and this is something that we're seeing kind of resurface right now. The associate deans have been working on this. So currently, there's a working draft related to, it's called a student declaration of extenuating circumstance. So not just medical notes, but for example, if there's an emergency in the family, you have a child, for example, you're a student with an emergency as well, that would be considered under a self-declaration for accommodation. Currently, the draft is looking at about 3 times an entire year. And so currently the associate deans have been working closely on that. We've been in communication with them and trying to get it to Senate by April. Would mean that it would take effect likely come the fall, which would be a big win. We know that getting medical notes oftentimes can be a huge hurdle for students. So that's kind of an update there. On the municipal file, we had our local advocacy week, which I have a slide later, so I'll just show it to you after. This morning, met with the really great conversations, just generally about the city, about transit. There's a new transit plan that's coming to the city council on March 14th, so I'm sure you've heard BRT a lot. March 14th, it's going to the city's Civic Works Committee. March 20th at 3 p.m. at Centennial Hall, there's going to be a public consultation. For example, a bus to be able to get students out there, because I know that transit is a huge concern for students, and particularly what transit's going to look like. If rapid transit's going to go up Warrencliffe Road, if it's going to go up Richmond Road, if there's going to be dedicated bus lanes. I know a lot of students are very concerned. So that was a top of mind conversation, and also there was a meeting recently this week with the LTC. And we know that the LTC is going to be is focused on providing better express service for students up Warrencliffe Road as well as up Richmond Road, which is really great. Once we get details, we'll be able to share that with you, so you can share that with students, because busing is. Eventually, we have the USA General Assembly. We leave tomorrow evening, and so we have our delegates, and we will be headed there. Thank you very much for going through the elections process. Another piece is today, USA spoke in favor of a private member's bill from NDP Faisal Hassan with the NDP related to work integrated learning and skills, because we know that students want more job opportunities. Another piece is related to, oh yeah, we saved transit. I don't know if it happened before the last council meeting, but we saved transit. Pretty cool. Really big win. Great. Awesome. And then on the federal file, as Mitch mentioned, so we have a group of some of the U15 schools, and we're working on some policy related to the federal election. Federal politics is so interesting right now. So we have a policy working group, particularly as the parties start creating their platforms. And there's a lot of really interesting data that's happening federally. One is related to the tuition tax credits that you receive, which is about 40% of your OSAP. And we know that's a very interesting topic right now, so we're focusing our efforts federally a lot. And so we're interested, can recently just release some data related to students' mental health needs and the statistics behind that. And for example, how I have some of the stats here, but in the most recent Stats Can data, they found that 77% of youth not diagnosed with any long-term health conditions in their school are enrolled in secondary education by their early 20s. That number is 60% of youth diagnosed with a neurodevelopmental condition, and 48% of youth diagnosed with a mental health condition, and 36% of youth diagnosed with both a neurodevelopmental condition and a mental health condition. And so stayed up with our research team, trying to figure out some policy related to that, which I'm sure that the Advocacy Standing Committee will see, as well as this council. So taking a look at that, as well as Pints and Politics, March 13th, free beer, free food, it's great. But we also, basically what we do is we invite, about this, but really cool opportunity to engage. So far, we recently sent out invitations, but we already have our boy MP Peter Fragascatos, our local representative federally for the Liberals. He'll be attending. Our MPP in London North Centre, Terence Kernahan, for the NDP. We have Conservative MP from Elgin, Middlesex, London. I think Middlesex is omitted federally. And then we also have Councillor Elizabeth Pelosa got back to us very quickly, who's in Ward 12. So make sure to be there March 13th. Tell your friends. And then maybe I'll see you at Rick's after. And then the last piece of information is Local Advocacy Week. It was our best one yet. This is our first Local Advocacy Week after both a provincial and a municipal election. I think we've met, so we met with all 4 of our MPPs. Including a minister of cabinet, which is great. We met with 3 out of 4 of our MPs, and Kate Young have a meeting scheduled next week with her. Unfortunately, couldn't be a part of Local Advocacy Week because just some timing issues. And then we met with over 75% of City Council, newly elected council. Now that means we have met with, the USC has met with and had a good impression on every city councillor in the City of London. So I would say that the USC is very highly regarded as a advocacy body in the City of London. I can't take credit for that, but the USC is doing some pretty good work, and it speaks to also a lot of the programs that we have. Kind of boost the profile, the image of students in London. For example, Orientation Serves, our early outreach program, you name it. So I think good job to students, everyone on the live stream, and all of you in here. But yeah, these are a photo of a few of our meetings. So cool. And that's it for me. Any questions? Comments?
No. Yes. So I saw that the bridge is reopening, so that's exciting.
Yes.
Do you know, or does anyone know, if the bus routes are reverting or if they're staying the same?
They know that the university's in conversation with LTC to make sure that everyone's on the same page. But there is that understanding that will likely happen.
Okay, so it's going to revert probably.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I will tell you otherwise if we learn otherwise. Great. Any other questions? Also, opportunity. Okay, great. No other questions? Cool. Awesome, thank you.
Okay, you don't have to do that. Yeah, okay, it was just. Hey everyone, Karina here. I did that for you. Okay, so I'm going to go into some completed items and then move on to updates. So first and foremost, there was a council fair on February 11th, which 10 councils participated. We had professional schools, HBK representation, obviously all in the private professional schools were invited, and really proud with what that did. It was really nice actually seeing everybody down in the UCC atrium on the 11th, talking about what they do in your councils, because sometimes whether you are in Talbot or whether you're over in the education building, it's really nice to have everybody come together so our students can see it. So thanks to everybody in your councils. Recently there was an LTC Travel Safe program graphic that went out on our social media. That was something that I came up with as a result of sitting on the Safe Cities Committee. And something that LTC mentioned was, do students know that there's a travel safe program? And because I don't. And students make up 52% of your ridership, so that's a problem. So we worked together in order to create a graphic that would advertise to our student body that there is a travel safe program, and it compels 4 different things that the LDC does in order to keep our community safe. So that's actually on our social media to spread awareness for our students, because I think that's really important. The third thing, a dance scene is currently in the UCC basement. We're really happy with it. We're excited. A lot of students, I mean, it's booked almost every night from my understanding. And this came out of the desire, well, first and foremost, the Thames building closed, and a lot of our dance affiliated clubs were using that space. And with club space already so limited as it is, we need to ensure that our clubs that dance have room to do so, which is why it's exclusively dance events only. However, everybody has access to every other space, dance clubs included. They have access to this space, Mustang Lounge, etc., all of our spaces to book. This one's just exclusively for dance clubs, and it includes like mirrors in the flooring that would complement that. We've gotten really good feedback from it, and this is what they asked us to change.
like putting a garbage in there and a broom, etc., we've been able to accommodate. So that's the most we've heard, which is really good, and we're excited about this. We're in the hashtag rat season, as my associate clubs Declan mentions. We've had club de-ratifications and club ratification process. It's a part of our process every year. 56 clubs applied, just if anyone was wondering. So far, we've ratified 5, but we still have many more to go, so we're really excited to look through this process, and I'll keep you updated as we go. I disseminated the accessibility and inclusivity checklist that was, of course, approved by this council and brought forward working through with Councillor Danesi on that. And I actually had a lot of really good feedback, so I disseminated it to all in as much of a capacity as I could, and people were emailing me back actually saying thank you, and this was a really great initiative from council, so pat on your back, really great job, and also to our peer programs as well. So, thank you to engineering for clapping. I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, counselor and coordinator mixer, which you attending for this meeting. Really appreciate you coming out. My coordinators were really excited to take part in this because they really value this process, and they really want to ensure that you have the tools necessary in order to understand this position, so that when you go to vote on March 10th, you can say you understand the portfolio and the people that work within it. So thank you so much for coming out to that, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any feedback, club survey. We sent out a really comprehensive club survey in collaboration with Michaela's portfolio in January. We had it open for about 3.5 weeks. We had tons of submissions, and over the reading break, I was in the office. They were not. They were on vacation though, which is deserved, which is very deserved. I'm just gonna let it. I was in the office, and some of the things I did was able to consolidate a lot of the feedback that we received from the club survey. And from those, I was able to create 12 action items before I leave this role for the club system. And if anybody would like me to go through what those incorporate, I'd be more than happy to do so. But they're basically also going to be used as recommendations, because as we are I want to ensure that we're setting them up for success as they take over the entire system. So based off these recommendations from our club system, I'm hoping that this will lead them in a great direction. Something else I really wanted to mention, and this is in line with accountability and transparency. So as I'm sure the student programs officer oversees a $90,000 programming budget. That $90,000 programming budget is typically broken up every single year by the SPO in order to pay for events such as Beer Fest, the Purple Series, like the concerts, different initiatives that you're doing throughout the year. I just wanted everyone to know that I've created a comprehensive breakdown of what I spent $90,000 on, and if at any time, or if you as the ones who voted me in would like me to present on what that breakdown is, I'd be more than happy to do so. Or if you'd like to schedule a meeting with me to ask how I've broken that down, I just want to ensure that you understand, especially as we're moving into this this new time with the Student Choice Initiative, you understand every single line, what we're spending money on, and $90,000 sounds so big and ambiguous, but I do have a breakdown, and I want you all to be aware of that. So if you wanted to know what that goes to, more than happy to explain it. As I said, it's mostly programs like Beer Fest and whatnot, but I have a good breakdown that I can share. Additionally, like to touch on a couple other pieces. So first and foremost, try to move the income tax clinic, which is currently a coordinator of mine, to the Secretary Treasurer portfolio, recognizing that some of the visioning Andrew and I did was around strategic visioning for the role and how we can continue to ensure that it expands. And one of the things we came up with was around financial literacy. We really see the income tax clinic coordinator beyond. Well, actually, my sister Sophia has done that, and she's planned a financial literacy class that was actually quite successful this semester, but we see it doing more than just that. Like, we see it really expanding, and part of that is in order to ensure that that happens, putting it where it has the resources in order to expand. So we've moved that coordinator under Andrew's portfolio. Additionally, another change is we've decided to move the charity ball position, so they will not be rehired next year. Okay, now on to some updates. So I was recently talking with alumni, and we are in the process of having a conversation around creating an initiative called Adopt Us Off, which would be kind of acting as this subsidy that we currently have going on, that we're SOF, however, it would be funded by alumni. So the typical SOF fee is $130, $30 of that, $30 of that, and then the $100 being uniform, 30 being like the fee, together $130. And I know, right? It's cute, Michaela. I hear you. Adopt Us Off. So it, cute name, but also really effective, and alumni are really into it. We're really heavily involved, and they really value the program. So we're talking about the logistics of that and how we'd be able to implement it. It's very in the early phases, but if anybody wants to know more about it, I'd be happy to share what I know. Additionally, also talking with alumni about ensuring that we have committed early outreach funding. So similar to the Adopt Us Off, it would be like Adopt a Kid through our early outreach program, and breaking it. Yeah, I guess that doesn't sound great. Sponsor a kid. Is that worse? Financially sponsor? Okay, I'm gonna keep moving. I guess in hindsight that doesn't sound great. Ignore it. Regardless, for every person that attends, there's, of course, we spend a certain amount per individual that attends the conference, and we'd like to see how we can get alumni to fund each. Okay, you get it. Okay, moving on. Orientation. So some things that we're working on. Before I leave, I'd really ask in terms of improving the governance structure of orientation, as was actually a conversation tonight in and around the COPs and whatnot. People are kind of unfamiliar as to how that process works, and I'd really like to work with orientation in order to improve that process. So we're just looking through, seeing what issues exist, and then going to do some analyzing and then some implementation with the orientation program, and with the additionally working on budgets. With Andrea around that. Interviewing for SOFs is currently happening, which is really exciting. Some advisory priorities for the next advisory meeting, which is happening in March, which again I co-chair, is plagiarism. Something that came from the AVP student experience was integrating athletics into orientation week and embedding our peer program. So that's something that I've been trying to do all year, and my coordinators have been meeting with the COPs in order to see how we can actually implement this. So we're going to see how we can ensure in the future we're directing ops to ensure that they are an embedded part of the orientation planning process. Additionally, something that I implemented in October and I wanted to bring to this table because I realized is that we have something called essentially my coordinators last semester were like, Karina, we really want to see more of you, and they have a dedicated space called the Annex, and it's something that I do every week, so I figured you would want to know because it's my job to report back to you about what I'm doing. So once a week I have Annex hours in the Annex to meet with the coordinators and stay up to date with them. They're, as I'm sure you've realized tonight, just so I'm actually like, to be able to do such a thing like that, but just wanted to let you know. Additionally, we have the STIGMA event, Breaking the Stigma, STI, Sexually Transmitted Infections, event on March 28th, which is a really cool event, and we always look to break the, stop, it's not that bad. No, not the event. Wow, this is going well. We always look to break the world record, and Western consistently does that, go Western. And around testing for STIs, so we're looking to do the same thing this year. I'm also preparing for transition, which involves a lot more work than you think. It's like a lot of everything I'm doing, I'm now thinking of how am I going to ensure that whomever comes after me is able to adopt this or understand what's going on, and so I'm really going into that mindset as we continue on with the rest of the year, as are the rest of the executives. I thought it was just more relevant because we're currently in the middle of it. Additionally, student choice initiatives, some people have been raising concerns around the fact that my peer programs are at risk. So of course my peer programs being my allyship network coordinator, who is here tonight, Indigenous Relations, Gender Equality Network, etc. So I'm doing what I can in order to mitigate the harm that's going to be brought to those programs, so we can ensure that we consistently and continue to provide the phenomenal services that they provide in Flagship. So if anybody would like to learn a little bit more about what I'm doing, I'd be happy to talk about it. Food support services. Recently, so I was, Mitch, myself, and Red Frogs actually met a few weeks ago in order to discuss some things that they can be assisting us in doing. And one thing was food support services are on Campus Food Bank, partnering with Red Frogs in order to do grocery trips every other two. So professional school, main campus can sign up to do grocery trips. The pickup location is at Alumni Hall. They take them to the grocery stores and then bring them directly to their house. This is in order to mitigate any accessibility concerns or students who are having trouble in terms of accessing grocery stores or getting food, et cetera. Whatever that barrier may be, we're trying to ensure that we're excited about this program, and it's every other Tuesday. You'll see it advertised on Food Support Services Facebook. Michaela and I have been working quite hard actually with the orientation team around creating a communications plan about OSERVs. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with OSERVs and the wonderful work they do of putting our students out in the community, like 2,000 plus of our students in September. It's a phenomenal program, but some of our students, and especially our community members, don't actually know very much about it. So we're doing our best in order to create a communications plan that we can implement this upcoming year to show our community what we're doing and how integral this program is, not just to Western, but to the London community generally. I think this would also play into the conversation we're hearing around Purple Fest and specifically the unsanctioned street parties in the end of September. So I was also at the meeting, the community meeting that Mitch was talking about on Monday, where community members came. Michaela was there. We do have some enraged London, concerned London citizens, which is completely we understand. what we really want to ensure they know is Western students care about London. We live here, we work here, we go to school here. It's part of our student experience as well, the London broader community. So we want to show the great work that we're doing. OSERVS is a part of that, so we're really excited to increase that. Festival of the Arts is coming up. Campus Celebration of the Arts. Hello. Solidarity. So we've got Festival of the Arts, which we're really excited about, and there's going to be a lot of events, and of course we're partnering with our FAM faculties in order to be implementing events that week, so look out for advertisements. And my last slide, I'm looking at our signage, so for the folks who know what the Peer Support Center is but don't know where it is, it's on the second floor, but we want to increase the signage. We've been doing some work around the stairwells in order to help people navigate their way to the space, but then on the space itself, we're working to increase that. Another thing for Peer Support Center, our volunteer recruitment is from February 15th to March 10th. All students at Western, I'm hoping in order to recruit for the position. We've had over 30 applicants, and I wrote this yesterday, so over 30 applicants apply as of right now, and we still have quite a way to go, so very excited about that. It's always a really great program that people apply to. We're changing the CGC member appointments, which I brought during my presentation about moving the club system. Not sure why. But essentially the CGC members, club's governance committee members, are going to come here to be elected the same way that USA delegates do in order to increase transparency and accountability. So if anyone wants to ask more questions, they certainly can. Another initiative I'm doing that I'm really excited about is downstairs in the atrium, there's a UCC atrium lounge, and on the wall it says student artwork, and it was a series of like poorly worded motivational posters before now, and I was like, that's not student artwork. So I'm actually, I've sent out a call for artwork in the student community. Frank, why are you Snapchatting me? So I sent out a in the student community, and tons and tons of interest in this, and we're going to be barely paying back. We're going to be paying back the student artists, so we're not going to be asking them to donate their work. We're not going to be saying, you know, would you consider just giving this to us? We're going to be paying them, which I think is really in line with the public arts coordinator mission in terms of ensuring that our properly compensated for our work. That, and those will be permanently displayed in the UCC atrium. For some de-stressor events, so last semester I had the gaming in the UCC atrium. We got Game, which you might have seen, all of the cool video games. This semester, we are going to be doing a virtual reality escape room in the UCC atrium later in, and it's going to be for the entire day, go through and navigate it. It's just something for people if they wanted to have like the UCC atrium, if they're there and they wanted to go do something fun. It's just to liven up the space and make it cool. Do you have a question, Juliana? Yeah. It is what it is.
Just out of curiosity, work that you guys are viewed as an investment? Like, in the event that one of those student artists, like, becomes famous? Like just out of curiosity, because you could make wild bank off that. So, just wondering, you could put it forward as, like, an investment of sorts of bank thing, so.
I'm not sure I was going to make a contract for it. It was more going to be an exchange of, you know, product and cash. But we could definitely, I think that's a good idea. What I mentioned was we would be permanently having the artwork, and therefore it's not temporary. They can't take it back.
Yeah.
Mitch has grabbed the mic, so I'm going to. I don't think I'm doing anything illegal. Rebecca,
No.
Okay, go on. Cool. Good to know. Thanks for the question. Really appreciate your line of thinking. Some other things. Clubs have asked for professional development sessions, so we're actually offering one. We offered one last semester. We're offering them professional development being around, you know, things that they've requested are like conflict resolution, sexual violence, disclosures, that sort of stuff. So we're working with them, and we're providing one tomorrow. I have a Vice President Student Events Roundtable tomorrow. I have one every month. Literally wonderful people in this year. Counterparts at campus and professional schools, all doing really wonderful programming on campus. We're having a club appreciation gala in March. More details to come for that. The food, quote unquote, policy. We do not have a policy called food, if anyone was wondering. But it is a variety of policies that in order to understand how to have food on this campus. We're consolidating all that information, as I've mentioned multiple times before, and we're in the final creations of actually like designing the booklet that we're going to have, or not booklet so much as like a little handbook that's going to be disseminated across everything, including faculty councils and affiliate councils, etc. on our campus, which will hopefully help because it's definitely been something that when I came into this role I really wanted to do. It just takes a really long time to consolidate that information, so looking forward to putting that out there. Crisis counseling dates have been finalized. They're going to be an entire month from March 11th to April 11th. This is both on King's campus and to the logistics of counselors not being able to go to a variety of campuses. Additionally, the other campuses, we've worked with the administration there. So for example, here in Brusha, and they determined that King's would be the best location in order to do this. So if anyone was wondering why it's only King's and not also the other campuses, that's why it's the administration that made that decision. Last semester, at our crisis counseling, 55 students came to crisis counseling on main campus and 5 students went to King's. Additionally, just wanted to briefly go over some sexual violence advocacy that's being done in my portfolio. With Safe Cities, I sit on the recommendation committee. Safe Cities, Western's got its own approach to Violence Prevention and Education Committee. I'm reforming the terms of reference for that because it's kind of a disaster at the moment. Sorry, Western. And Western Sexual Violence Framework plus the federal framework and consolidating that onto our campus. So if anybody has any question about that, I'd kind of skim through it really quickly. Please come meet me. My coordinators are doing really cool events on Saturday. Relife for Life is happening. If you were involved in that, but it's such a cool event. A dunk tank. We're going to have headphone disco. We're going to have lots of food. So it's always a really, really great event. Additionally, Pride Week is coming up, I believe, next week. Festival of the Arts, as I mentioned. The Spring Musical, Chicago, is happening in 2 weeks. And our income tax clinic is coming up as well. As per usual, 2 to 3 p.m. And I'd like to mention that I'm actually really excited to talk to you all about is right now there is an inordinate amount of tampons outside of my office for a reason, if anyone's seen my Instagram stories. They're not for personal use, if anyone was wondering. They are for a pilot project that we are running and bringing this to campus. So it's going to be a bathroom on every, Lucy saw them. I know, you were like, the boxes were this big. I had a couple stairs. But they're going to be on a bathroom in every floor of this building, and in some cases, multiple bathrooms on each floor. We're going to be putting out promotion on this. We are going to be aware of what this means and how surveys so we can collect data on it. And we're actually really excited because this advocacy has been happening a long time from our executive, but administration are starting to show some interest, especially in the fact that we're doing this now, and they're interested in seeing the data that we collect. So, not saying anything, they're excited about this, I think that we're pushing in the right direction. So we're really excited. It's going to be launching next month. It's a pilot project to collect data, and it's going to be as long as supplies last. So if anyone has any questions about it, I'd be more than happy to talk about it. I'm really excited. And lastly, of course, is the SPO campaigning time period right now. I'd actually like to call out Jack, actually scheduled a meeting with me as we discuss, the SPO position in order to understand more about the position. And I really, really appreciated that. I thought that was absolutely wonderful. Hopefully I'm not putting you on the spot. Thanks, Jack. I welcome any other counselor. I would do phone calls at 9 p.m. I'll come in at 7 a.m. Whatever your time schedule is, I'm more than happy to talk about this position so that you need in order to be informed. Tonight with the coordinators and counselor mixer, that was one part of it, but I really want to expand that. I want you to know what you're doing and be really, really confident in understanding the role before you go vote. So I am more than happy to do whatever that means in terms of supporting you as counselors and being informed voters. I don't know if anybody has any questions. There's a couple questions. Yes, Jack. Hey.
Okay, here we go. Can you tell us how many clubs were de-ratified?
Yes, 31.
Thank you.
Hi, I just have a question about the partnership with Red Frogs.
Yes.
I know that we've partnered with them before for some events, and they're really awesome. I love the free donuts. Just like, if you could address, I know that they are a religiously affiliated group deep in the background, but just how that.
Really wonderful question, Jordan. That's actually a question that I brought up to them because I was wondering. So Red Frogs actually functions in a variety of countries. They were really popular in Australia for a really, really long time. And Red Frogs is an organization that just exists to help. They have been used, I know Mac used them years ago. They're really, really wonderful organization. They don't look for any money in return. They're not looking for anything, and I'm always waiting for their shoe to drop, but it never does. They're just these really helpful, really enthusiastic folks. And so yes, Red Frogs is affiliated with Gateway Church. However, the organization itself is separate. I've made that distinction very clear with them. I'm not saying anything specific. It's just I wanted to ensure that Red Frogs is its own organization, and that's who we're receiving support from, and that is the case. Hopefully that clarifies. Cool. Awesome. Any other question? If not, International Women's Day is on USD online. Thanks.
Sorry, I forgot something. Local Advocacy Week. Thank you to everyone on Advocacy Standing Committee who took part in advocacy. Some would call it but thank you for your hard work and meeting with these politicians. Y'all did great. Thank you.
Okay, so that is the end of our allotted time, but we still have 2 executives to go. So if someone would like to motion to extend, for how long? Motion to extend for 20 minutes. I'll need a seconder. Councillor Sun, anyone opposed to a 20-minute extension? Okay, great.
Go ahead. Great. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Mine will not be quite as long as everybody else's. It's okay. Anyway, so far what I've completed in the last month, we did a lot of transition date planning and figuring all of that out, which was really great to set up the next people for success. We've also figured out the associate/coordinator position. How to be coordinating that on the exec side. So we were able to do all of that, and those changes actually include the income tax coordinator, the clubs, like clubs, associate, and coordinators based on that change, and also the charity ball coordinator. So we made a lot of changes there, and we've all kind of like looked at how we can stuff for the next person up to succeed. So that was really great. Also, we had the board winter retreat that I went to, and I created the secretary treasurer hiring assignment. So that is ongoing right now, and yes, and then clubs and finalized. Like I said, we moved the positions when they're being hired right now is going to be under secretary treasurer, so they'll have that intention coming into the job and applying for the job. So yeah, in terms of budget planning, a lot has been going on. It's kind of hard to write it all down, but creating a rough draft of the fee bill categories, reviewing the technical briefings that we did get from the government, and getting the extension on the Board of Governors date has all kind of occurred, and a lot kind of going on internally with all of that. Yeah, and then the last we had our annual planning meeting is happening, so I joined the committee that plans that meeting that happens in June, and we've gotten quite far on that. We're also working on a proposal that we brought to the January meeting to increase Western representation on the board. So we basically highlighted something we'd like to pursue. So we'll be going back with a proposal for that, and hopefully next year we'll be able to at least involve one counselor in Campus Trust, because I think that would be a really beneficial experience. So yeah, and to come, the fee schedule, transition planning, secretary. Although, yeah, I sit on the panel as a resource member, so just providing my resource set. So, yep. Any questions? Okay. Seeing none. I'm done. I'm tired. Anyway, sorry. Grants, fun stuff. Okay, so just wanted to provide another update because I provided one end of last semester. So since last semester, I'm just going to go over a couple things that we funded, and the ones that are from like last semester when I presented to kind of weren't highlighted in that, and just a couple of new ones, and some photos here. And then yeah, so a lot of things has been going on in grants. So yeah, any cool stuff to look to. Any questions? Anything? Okay, I'm done now.
Hello, good evening. Okay, so first things, the USD job description /promotion today. We had the USC job fair, so I worked with our promotions team and our HR department to figure out a good way to advertise the different opportunities, including coordinator, intern, and associate positions within the USC. We also promoted the LTC survey graphic, which, if you weren't aware, the LTC, I announced it at the last council meeting survey, about ways that you can access their services. Local Advocacy Week, Danny and I worked on a bit of a campaign and a survey to send out to different constituents, which you should have all received as well, which was then used to kind of guide the priorities for Local Advocacy Week and inform those priorities moving forward. Once again, to all the candidates. Beyond that, the communications job descriptions, as well as under my portfolio, the different associate and coordinator positions have been clarified. Thanks to Andrea for all her work on that. In terms of media coverage and prep, it's kind of been a busy month-ish. The homecoming task force, community town halls that were hosted on Monday, if you were aware, was quite a spicy meeting, very fun. We also had a bunch of interviews in the Gazette recently, so some of the important ones were Dance Base and breaking the STI GMA. Some of those different events. There's also been some work on different meeting preps with members of administration, as well as student feedback reviews. So we did a survey with accessibility under Karina's portfolio and the Local Advocacy Week. So my student feedback coordinator is working on reviews of both of those surveys. The next piece, again, thank you so much. If you haven't already, sign up for our newsletter. We send it out every week. My communications teams put together about 1 to 3 stories, new stories every week, about the cool things happening within the USC. And on top of that, there's always like a nice little message from the executive, and it features a bunch of different USC. So I encourage you to share this. We're working on promotion, so you'll actually have an opportunity to share this with your constituents, but you can also go to this website and sign up. Cool. Cheers. The next thing to come, USC, did you think I was done? Western Student Experience and the Rec Center to run focus groups and gather student feedback on how best to proceed in the future, determining based on use and as well as people who had reached out via the email we set up. The next piece on that is Student Feedback Committee. Student Experience has been generous to our management team with some focus group training and what that would look like moving forward so we can be independent in conducting these focus groups. USC Weekly Update, which you all saw. Featured stories on social media as well as our website. I'm also, Karina mentioned this in her presentation, working on communications with coordinator and some people at Student Success to make sure that's a success and that we're sharing the good stories within our community and how students contribute to the London community broadly. We're also working on a bunch of different media advisories, press release, including the menstrual product pilot project that Karina mentioned for International Women's Day. And a bunch of different campaigns within the Student Choice Initiative. We're also preparing for the federal budget next week, and that announcement that will be coming. And then within the Western Sexual Violence Framework and federal framework, I'm working with my communications team and how we'll be proceeding in terms of a community moving forward. That's it.
Okay, great. Thank you to all of our executives. We have the chair of the
Hi, everybody. I won't keep you for very long, I promise. So we had our board retreat. So we have 2 board retreats. We have a winter board retreat and we have a summer board retreat. So in the winter one, so it's great and to allow sort of the leaving board members to impart some knowledge. So that was really great. We had a meeting since we've last seen you, where we received the Q2 documents. We went over some HR policies, and of course, we're having a board this Friday. There's not too much on the agenda. Of course, we're talking about the Student Choice Initiative again. We're tying up some loose ends, especially in like the finance and governance committees. And then at the AGM on March 10th, you will ratify the last last presentation as board chair. Thank you for dealing with me, I guess. Oh, thanks, I guess. Does anyone have any questions for me? No? Great.
Next, we will have the report from the chair of the student senators. Yeah, no, okay. Next, we will move on to have reports from our standing committee chairs, starting with governance and finance.
Right along 2257 class right before this. So the Governance and Finance Committee, we haven't actually met to discuss anything substantive recently. However, Mitch mentioned to you guys the huge motion that's being brought forward. We're going to be talking about that. If anyone's interested in dropping by, we'll be in the USC boardroom. Yeah, perfect. At 6:30, come by. I know it's a big motion. A lot of people are interested in having a say potentially. So if you are interested, please feel free to drop by. And that's it for Governance and Finance.
Oh, is there a question? Councillor Jimenez. Thank you.
Hello. Does anyone who comes to the meeting, if anyone comes to the meeting, are they all able to speak, or members want to attend?
Like, usually they're a little less formal if you are interested in speaking. Like, we're not going to bar you, but if obviously a lot of people show up, we aren't going to try to limit it to the amount of people that are officially supposed to be a part of the committee.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, next we will have the Advocacy Standing Committee.
A really quick update from Advocacy Standing Committee today. Last meeting, we discussed the motion that appeared today regarding the anti-discrimination segments of the community standards policy. Our next meeting is tomorrow, as well as the mature students subcommittee met recently as well, and that's a subcommittee to the Advocacy Standing Committee, and they discussed sort of three main things. Number one being a space for mature, number two being a for mature students, and number three being a sort of awareness campaign around different mature student issues. That's it from me. Any questions? Neato.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Like the other two, nothing super substantive to tell you about, but we changed the name of policy to Peer Support Center Policy, so that was super exciting. We did discuss the mental health working group motion, and we'll apparently be discussing that more. We went through kind of the public arts review, which we passed tonight, and we discussed our food sport services review, which and we will bring that. Beyond that, we magically discovered that the Student Experience Committee is responsible for electing someone to the Orientation Advisory Committee, which has been neglected for the past few years, as far as I know, which is nobody's fault. So we did elect a student to, that was, okay. We did elect a student to that committee for the one meeting that is taking place next month, and then presumably next year's committee will be electing someone else, and beyond that, that is all I have. Any questions? That's literally no one's fault.
The Agenda and Council Operations Standing Committee had an email vote the Friday just for reading week, just because it was a little easier than trying to get everyone together, and we passed the agenda that we had this evening. Meeting again, for the AGM, go through the Advocacy Standing Committee and the Governance and Finance Standing Committee, and we'll be approving that agenda, and then it will be sent out to you hopefully Friday or Saturday this week. Okay. We are now in the for discussion section of our agenda. Would anyone like to bring anything for discussion at this time?
Huron President, I just wanted to give you all a quick update on the Western investment portfolio discussion and question and answer period that we had last month. If you recall the conversation regarding the ESG, an email the day after the meeting to request the registry be sent out or at least made somewhat public. I got a response today saying, we'll look into it, thanks. So let me advocate on this. Shoot me a Facebook message and I'll coordinate from there regarding how to maybe request this in an effective way. Thanks.
Okay, any other for discussion items? Okay. Council at this time. Okay, seeing no new business, I'll look for a mover and a seconder to terminate. Councillor McCauley and Councillor Hollenberg. And the meeting adjourned.
Put it on. Wait, is it on? Hey everyone, as a reminder, there's